Chapter 7:15. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su were taken aback when they heard that. Their faces instantly turned ugly. Shopkeeper Ma smiled coldly and said, "Third Master Lin, you saw it too. It's not that we don't want to give you face. Your Lin family really has produced a powerful person," Shopkeeper Su said in a strange tone. He turned around and said, "Let's go." He and Shopkeeper Ma turned around and left. Bai Yu looked at Third Master Lin, then at Lin Wanru, and also turned around to leave. "Let's hold a family meeting." Third Master Lin looked around and said to the Lin family members, "It's time to choose someone who truly thinks for the Lin family." The family meeting was not an ordinary meeting. It was only held when it involved important matters, such as the renegotiation of the person in charge of the Lin family's business. The Lin family's attention was not on Third Master Lin, but on what was behind him. Shopkeeper Ma and the others did not leave, not because they did not want to, but because the door was blocked. Although it was not the main door of the Lin family, it was still quite spacious. If two fat men stood there, it would still be a little crowded. Before Shopkeeper Ma could say "move aside," he shivered and held back his words. He smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Qian, please." Shopkeeper Su and Bai Yu quickly moved aside. Others might not recognize the god of fortune money, but as businessmen, how could they not recognize him? After moving aside hurriedly, they were confused. Today was the Lin family's family banquet. What was the famous god of fortune money doing here? However, the god of fortune money did not care about the three of them. He straightened his belly and walked straight inside. So fast. Li Yi, who was eating melon seeds nearby, stood up and murmured. Third uncle of the Lin family turned around and looked at the familiar yet strange fat man with a puzzled expression. Lin Wanru was surprised for a moment. She stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Welcome, Shopkeeper Qian. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you. You are Lin." The god of fortune money straightened his belly and looked at him. Halfway through his sentence, he saw a figure sitting in front of him. He immediately bent down and asked, "You are Miss Lin Wanru, right?" "Yes." Lin Wanru nodded. She suppressed her doubts and asked, "What brings you here, god of fortune money?" Only then did everyone realize that the person in front of them was the famous fortune god of money. Their expressions changed instantly. The name Fortune God of Money was like a myth in the hearts of the merchants in Feng Province. The minds of Shopkeeper Ma and the other two were still in a mess. Hearing the name of the god of wealth, Third Master Lin stood rooted to the ground. He felt like his tongue was tied and he couldn't move a single step. "Just call me Shopkeeper Qian, don't stand on ceremony, Miss Lin." "You are welcome, Miss Lin." The god of fortune money waved his hand and said, "I have a business to discuss with Miss Lin this time. Is it convenient now?" As soon as the god of fortune money said this, not only Lin Wanru, but also Shopkeeper Ma and the others could not believe their ears. Who else in Feng State had such great airs to let the god of fortune money come to talk business in person? When they thought about it more deeply, their faces began to turn pale and their hearts became anxious. Even the god of fortune money came to visit in person. Was the Lin family still the Lin family they were familiar with? Lin Wanru was also surprised. Strange things had happened one after another these days. First, there were foreign businessmen seeking cooperation, and then the Qian family, a giant businessman, came to visit. Was the Lin family favored by the god of fortune? Thinking of something, she began to doubt again in her heart. She looked at the god of fortune money and asked carefully, "Is the Qian family also in the jewelry business?" The god of fortune money was stunned for a moment. He turned to ask a person behind him, "Does our family have a jewelry business?" "No." The fat man shook his head and said, "There are few customers in that shabby shop all day. It is not lively, so we don't do it." "Now we do." The god of fortune money thought for a moment. He looked back at Lin Wanru and said, "The jewelry business is very profitable. The Lin family has been in this business for decades. I can trust you. The Qian family has money and you have experience. We can cooperate." Lin Wanru was stunned. After coming to her senses, she nodded slowly and said, "Shopkeeper Qian," it said. When Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su heard this, their legs immediately became soft. What kind of cooperation was this? It was obvious that the Qian family was shamelessly sticking to them. When had the god of fortune money been so polite to others? The Lin family had found a great master. Even the god of fortune money had come to visit them in person. If they went against the Lin family, how could they survive in Fengzhou in the future? Bai Yu opened her mouth, but she didn't know what to say. She watched the Lin family crowd around them. She stood there in a daze. She looked at third master of the Lin family and found that he had the same expression. More than half of the people outside suddenly disappeared. Li Yi shook his head. This must be the arrangement of Zhao Yi. The reason why the god of fortune money's road to wealth was so smooth was probably because of him. It was a little exaggerated, but at least it showed that he took this matter to heart. A shadow appeared in front of him. Li Yi looked up and saw Qian Duo standing in front of him. He waved to him and said, "Brother, we meet again." Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "I have no poems to sell to you this time." Qian Duo quickly sat to the side and said, "Hey brother, don't be like this. The price can be negotiated." Li Yi couldn't figure out what was going on in his mind. He asked, "Why do you need so many poems? Is it just to woo those brothel girls?" Qian Duo gritted his teeth and said, "I just can't stand those scholars. As long as I can make them uncomfortable, I'm happy." "So you buy poems?" "They say I'm an idiot, so I write poems for them to see." Li Yi glanced at him. Those scholars must have hurt him a lot in the past. It made sense. He was fat and didn't study well. He used to be the target of bullying in school. "You make them uncomfortable just because you write poems?" Qian Duo nodded and said, "Just thinking about how they looked back then is enough to vent my anger." "Then you might as well spend a silver coin to find a few ruffians on the street. When they come out of the brothel at night, you can cover their heads and beat them up." Li Yi looked at him and said, "If you pay a silver coin, those ruffians will definitely do it. If you can beat up 10 with 1 tael of silver, how many can you beat up with 10,000 taels of silver? You can't be unhappy with all the scholars in the world, right?" Qian Duo was stunned for a moment and said, "Is that okay?" Li Yi looked at him again. This kind of rich young master had never experienced the sufferings of the human world. A silver coin was already a lot. With this silver coin, a poor family would have food to eat and not starve to death. If this isn't enough to vent your anger, spend more money. 1 tael of silver. 1 tael of silver to find a beggar with a child on the street. When he is drinking with his friends, rush in while crying and scold him for being heartless and abandoning his wife and son. Run away after scolding him a few times. I guarantee that he won't care about you in the future. That works." Qian Duo's eyes widened. "If you are willing to spend more money, 100 taels of silver, there will be lesser-known prostitutes willing to listen to you. They will spread the news that he doesn't pay for prostitutes. From then on, you won't see him in any brothel." Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "Think about it. How many things can you do with 10,000 taels of silver? Save it. Even if you have money, you shouldn't spend it like this." Chapter 716. Qian Duo was really a clean stream among the rich second generation. He used to be. In terms of financial resources, there were few families in the entire Feng state that could compete with the Qian family. In terms of background, the Qian family was backed by the third prince, Zhao Yi. Which poor scholar could afford to offend him? Such a person had always suffered from the cold eyes and ridicule of others, but he just wanted to buy a poem to show off. How did the Qian god of fortune teach his son? If it was someone else, they would have lost a few lives. When he encountered difficulties in the Qi kingdom, it was because of Qian Duo that he survived 2 financial crises. Just because Qian Duo called him brother, he would definitely help him. In order to prevent him from walking down the wrong path, he had said those words after careful consideration. Qian Duo obviously had not experienced the ugly baptism of the secular world. After Li Yi's words, he fell into deep thought. "I understand." When Li Yi was about to finish his cup of tea, Qian Duo suddenly stood up with a look of enlightenment on his face. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, "What do you understand?" "Spend the least amount of money and do the most things. You can't just think about throwing money. You have to do things cleverly." Qian Duo's face showed a thoughtful expression. "Every penny should be spent just right. That's what my father taught me." Li Yi nodded. Qian Duo understood the essence of those words so quickly. The boy was worth teaching. "So," Qian Duo turned to look at him and asked, "When are you going to pay me back?" This was a bit like burning the bridge after crossing the river. Just now, he had taught him so many life philosophies and guided him in the right direction. He hadn't even mentioned taking the money, but he was showing off first? This is different. Qian Duo looked at him and said seriously, "Thank you for your advice just now. I have benefited a lot. How much is that worth? Brother, name a price and I will give it to you immediately." He changed his tone and said, "But brother, you owe me a penny. You have to pay me back." Seeing his serious look, Li Yi began to admire the god of wealth's upbringing. To be able to raise such a son, it was enough to show that the god of wealth could climb to such a position in a short time, not entirely because of Zhao Yi. Li Yi had a look of appreciation on his face. He nodded and said, "The return event is over. I don't have any money." The nature of today's banquet could be considered as half a family banquet for the Lin family. The members of the Lin family were only a small part of them. Most of them were the shopkeepers and managers of the shops under their name. Although the Lin family was not considered a big merchant, there were still some smaller merchants that depended on them, including the Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family. Due to the close business relationship between the four families, they would often attend such occasions. At this time, most of the Lin family members had gone inside. Most of the people outside were outsiders. Those small merchants and the shopkeepers and managers of the Lin family were chatting with each other. They looked in a certain direction from time to time, and their faces were full of doubt and surprise. There were many rich families in Feng State City. There were also a few families that had dozens or even hundreds of years of history which the Qian family could not compare with. However, those high and mighty families had nothing to do with them. The Qian family, whose businesses were all over Feng State, was closely related to them. If the god of wealth was dissatisfied with them, he only needed to express a little bit, and these small businesses would face the danger of collapse. The god of wealth would not come to the Lin family for no reason and put on such an attitude. The Lin family was probably lucky this time. They had climbed up this high branch. Wouldn't they be rolling in money in the future? The shopkeepers and managers of the Lin family were naturally delighted. The bigger the Lin family's business was, the higher their status would be and the greater the benefits they would get. Those small merchants were naturally excited. Although they could not directly connect with the Qian family, it was not bad to be indirect. The Lin family was eating meat with the Qian family, so there should be some soup for them to drink, right? The Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family did not know what was wrong with them. Originally, with their relationship, they would definitely benefit the most this time. However, they chose to fall out with the Lin family at this time. It would be difficult for them to get on the same boat this time. Shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su were still standing at the door. They did not know whether to leave or stay. They had just fallen out with the Lin family, so it was not appropriate for them to stay here. It was too embarrassing. However, they could not let go of their worries. The Lin family was obviously not the same as before. If they really joined forces with the Qian family to do something to them, how could they live in the future? Bai Yu stood beside the two of them and looked in the direction that Qian God of Fortune had just gone. Then she looked at the figure who was talking to young Master Qian on the other side. Her expression was a little uncertain. After a long time, there was finally some movement in the matter that everyone was concerned about. Surrounded by the crowd, Qian God of Fortune walked out from inside and said with a smile, "You're too polite. It's settled then. The manager will discuss the specific cooperation matters with you when the time comes." The people present were not willing to let go of the opportunity to curry favor with Feng Zhou God of Fortune. They all stood up and rushed over. This time shopkeeper Ma and the other two were isolated. The three of them stood at the door, which was particularly conspicuous. He didn't want to argue with him over the matter of a copper coin. Seeing Lin Wanru walk over, Li Yi waved his hand at her and said, "Even though that's the case, it depends on my mood. That copper coin doesn't belong to you. If I want to give it to you, I'll give it to you. If I don't, you can't take it." Young Master Qian Duo still wanted to say something, but the woman behind him had already walked over. "Miss Lin." Qian Duo returned the greeting and turned back to continue carrying out his justice. Li Yi looked at Lin Wanru and then looked at Qian Duo. He signaled in the direction of the door with his eyes. Qian Duo was stunned and asked, "What do you mean? How could he be so insensible?" Li Yi looked at him again and said, "It means that you can go." Qian Duo looked back again and finally realized something. He turned around and walked in the direction of the door. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and reminded, "1 coin." After sitting down, Lin Wanru looked at him with some confusion and asked, "Young Master Qian, do you know him?" Li Yi nodded and said, I've seen him twice. Looking at the situation just now, it did not seem like they had only met twice. Lin Wanru looked back but did not ask again. There were too many things about him that she could not understand. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Have you negotiated with the Qian family?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "I don't know why the Qian family wants to cooperate with us, but according to the way they just said, it will only be good for the Lin family." Seeing that there was still a trace of worry between her eyebrows, Li Yi asked, "What are you worried about?" "I always feel that, these days it has been a bit too smooth." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, It's like someone is helping us. From the foreign merchants to the Ma family and the Su family's source of goods. And today the God of Fortune came to visit us. Everything is too smooth." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Isn't it too smooth? It's like being blessed by the gods." Lin Wanru smiled and said, "In the past I didn't feel anything when I stumbled along the way, but now I feel a little uneasy." "Blessed by the gods." Li Yi was stunned and said with some embarrassment, you flatter me, what?" Lin Wanru looked up at him with some doubt in her eyes. "Nothing." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand. Lin Wanru nodded and looked at him and said, "Actually, I have something to tell you today. It was decided yesterday, so I didn't have time to tell you." Li Yi nodded and said, "Just in time, I also have something to tell you." "Then you first, you first." The two looked at each other and shook their heads and smiled at the same time. "I'm leaving. I want you to be the shopkeeper of the new shop." Lin Wanru paused for a moment, then nodded and said, "Since you're leaving, you should go back first. Miss Lu really does need someone to take care of her. This matter, when I go back later, I'll talk to you." Li Yi looked at her and said, "I'm going back to the Jing kingdom." Lin Wanru's voice stopped abruptly. She looked up at him with an uncertain expression and said softly, "What did you just say?" Chapter 717. I'm going back to the Jing kingdom soon. Li Yi looked at her, paused for a moment and said, "It was an accident that I came here. Now it's time to go back." "You are going back to the Jing kingdom?" Lin Wanru was stunned, but she soon came to herself and said, "It's not good to wander outside. You have to settle down eventually. But what about Miss Lu? If you go back like this, will your family?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "I've talked to my family." In the end, he didn't intend to tell Lin Wanru everything. It was good to say goodbye like this, and the impact on her heart might be less. Lin Wanru thought for a moment and said, "When are you leaving?" "I'll arrange Brother Lin to escort you back and bring some traveling expenses which will be needed on the way." "We're leaving today." Li Yi shook his head and said, "When we go back, there will be guards with us. We don't need to bother Brother Lin." Then, Lin Wanru looked around and said, "There are still some things there. I'll go there first." When Lin Wanru got up, there were many people around. "Wanru, do you have a candidate in mind for the manager of the new shop?" "Sister, is that the God of Fortune money? Does the Qian family really want to cooperate with our Lin family? The people of the Ma family, the Su family and the Bai family are back again. They are waiting there now. Would Wanru like to meet them?" Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Let's talk about these things later. I'm a little tired. I'll go back to my room first." The Lin family looked at each other. The new shop was about to open, and the God of Fortune money personally came to visit. The Lin family could be said to be soaring today, and it was foreseeable that they would be rolling in money in the future. But she didn't seem to be in a good mood. When Lin Yong came back with a pot of hot tea, he looked around in surprise, scratched his head and asked, "What happened just now?" They all looked very strange. Li Yi reached out to him and said, "Sit down, I have something to tell you." Lin Yong looked around and didn't find his Mississippi. Then he turned his head and said, "What's the matter? Do you still remember the foreign businessman that day?" Lin Yong nodded his head and said, "I remember. You're the one who can't stop talking, right? After cooperating with the Qian family, the Lin family's business will grow bigger and bigger, and there will be more and more shops. In the future you will often see those foreign merchants. You just have to cooperate with them like before. You can say these words to my Mississippi. I don't care what you say to me." Lin Yong asked in surprise, "Oh right, what are we eating tonight? Is it the same as yesterday?" "There is a box under the bed in the room next to Fonglin Garden. After tonight you can take it out and give it to your Mississippi." Lin Yong was even more surprised and asked, "Wait, what are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" Li Yi took out a booklet from his arms and handed it to him, saying, "Don't forget to give it to her. You must give it to her in person." Lin Yong was stunned. He looked at him and asked, "What on earth happened?" "Hurry up." On a street in Fengzhou City, a group of soldiers passed by quickly and pedestrians gave way. "What's going on? Are they going to arrest people again? Didn't they say that those people have been surrounded by the third prince? How can they come out? It seems that someone is going to be unlucky again." As the pedestrians on the street were talking, the young man in white who was walking in front urged again with a sullen face, "Hurry up. If they run away, can you bear the responsibility?" A man who looked like an official followed him and asked carefully, "It's not good to arrest people so casually, right?" The young man looked at him and said discontentedly, "What do you mean by casually arrest people? I suffered serious internal injuries because of him. Can't your yamen do something about it?" The accompanying officials lowered their heads and said nothing. County Magistrate Wu was in real trouble this time. He couldn't afford to offend any of these people from the capital. Although they were surrounded by the guards in the courier station a few days ago, the guards had retreated. Which official in Fengzhou dared to offend the first prince's people? County Magistrate Wu thought to himself, even if you have serious internal injuries, you should at least pretend to be more realistic. It's too arrogant to arrest people so aggressively, however he should be arrogant. Several officials in the yamen had been arrested by them. As a small county magistrate, if he disobeyed them on this matter, they could use any reason to take off his hat and escort him to the capital. The young man urged, "Where is the Lin family? Are we almost there?" County Magistrate Wu pointed to the front and said, "It's just in front, almost there." A trace of pleasure appeared on the young man's face. Although he wasn't surrounded in the courier station like the censors, he was still depressed. If he didn't take revenge, he wouldn't feel at ease when he returned to the capital. He had to leave Fengzhou tomorrow. It wasn't easy for him to get an order from his cousin. What could a lowly businessman do? However, time was short. He had to let the two women go this time. What a pity. Do you remember everything? Li Yi looked at Lin Yong again and asked. "Yes, I remember." Lin Yong nodded and immediately asked, "What happened? You should tell me now, right?" "I'm leaving." Lin Yong was stunned for a moment and said, "It's not too late to leave after you tell me what happened." As soon as he finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from the front. "Who is Li Xian?" Li Yi looked at him strangely and asked, "Is there a person called Li Xian here? Isn't that you?" Lin Yong looked at him in surprise. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He rubbed his forehead and said, "Sorry, I forgot." Lin Yong looked at him and then at the group of officials pouring in from the door. He was confused until a somewhat familiar young man walked in from outside. His expression finally changed. "Who is Li Xian?" A man in an official uniform stood at the door and asked loudly. Seeing the appearance of an official, everyone in the courtyard was stunned at first, and then they were all surprised. The Lin family was really troublesome today. First, the Ma family, Su family, and Bai family came to quarrel with each other. Later, the money god came to cooperate with them in person. As soon as the money god left, the officials came to the door. Didn't these people really discuss it? Who is Li Xian? I don't know. I've never heard of such a person in the Lin family. Is that the county magistrate? Why is the county magistrate here? Did the Lin family get involved in a lawsuit? The county magistrate's arrival brings light to the Lin family. While people were whispering timidly, the third master of the Lin family had already greeted the county magistrate with a frightened face. He asked cautiously, "May I know why the county magistrate has come to the Lin family?" "There is a person named Li Xian who is suspected of beating an official of the imperial court. Is he in the Lin family?" The third master of the Lin family was stunned and said, "No, there is no shopkeeper surnamed Li in the Lin family, and there is no one named Li Xian among the servants." As soon as he finished speaking, someone came from the side and whispered, "Isn't the accountant brought back by the eldest sister called Li Xian?" Chapter 718. Beating up an official of the imperial court? Bai Yu, who was standing behind the crowd, was startled. He naturally knew who Li Xian was and had even personally investigated him. He was the scholar who lived next to Fragrant Forest Park. Previously, he had embarrassed himself in front of Lin Wanru. Bai Yu naturally did not have a good impression of him. This person actually dared to beat up an official of the imperial court and even caused the county magistrate to come looking for him personally. This was truly gratifying. In an instant, Bai Yu's gaze immediately turned into a mocking one. The third master of the Lin family was also startled when he heard this. Then he seemed to have thought of something and turned his head to look in a certain direction. At a table in the back, a young man slowly stood up. The scholar that Wanru had picked up had initially caused a small disturbance in the Lin family. After all, the position of an accountant was very important. No one would feel at ease handing it over to an outsider. However, it was later discovered that this was not a measure taken by the young mistress of the Lin family to further monopolize the power. The scholar's title of accountant was just a title. It was said that he only stayed in the small courtyard next to Fragrant Forest Park and rarely went out. The family had their own guesses as to whether he was an accountant or a lover. However, this had nothing to do with their interests, so they gradually stopped paying attention to it. As time passed, they even forgot his name. He did not expect to hear his name again from the county magistrate's mouth. The third master of the Lin family was slightly angry. This scholar ate the Lin family's food and lived under the Lin family's roof. He actually caused so much trouble for the Lin family. The third master of the Lin family's face darkened. He looked at the scholar and said, "Li Xian, the county magistrate is asking a question. Hurry up and come over." In an instant, the focus of everyone's attention immediately shifted to the scholar in front of them. Beating up an official of the imperial court? Li Yi walked over and looked at the county magistrate. He asked, "May I know where the official of the imperial court that you mentioned just now is?" County magistrate Wu frowned slightly and said, "Come with me to the county office and you'll know." Although there was something fishy about this matter, there was no need to make the first prince unhappy over an unimportant person and bring unnecessary trouble to the third prince. "If I tell you to go, then go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" The third master of the Lin family frowned and said, "Hurry up and go." In the crowd, the sloppy old man threw down the chicken leg. Li Yi secretly made a gesture to him. The old man shook his head and picked up the chicken leg again. Li Yi didn't look at the Lin family's third master. He glanced at the young man standing behind the constables, who was looking at him with a mocking expression. He shook his head slightly. Before he left, he didn't even let him have some peace. It seemed that it was necessary to see Zhao Yi yesterday. Otherwise, after he left, who knew what would happen to the Lin family? Li Yi glanced at the county magistrate and said, "Let's talk outside." "Wait." A voice came from behind. Lin Wanru walked to the county magistrate and said, "I was also there that day. Please take me away with you." The third master of the Lin family's third master's face changed and he said, "Wanru, what are you doing here? It's none of your business here. Go back quickly." Just now, he wanted to take away the power in Lin Wanru's hands. But just now, the money god obviously came to the Lin family for her. The future of the Lin family depended on her. Now she couldn't have anything happen to her. Li Yi turned to look at Lin Wanru and said, "It's really nothing serious. Just make it clear." Lin Wanru looked away from the young man behind the constables and looked at the county magistrate. She said, "Aren't we going to the county office?" "Let's go." Lin Yong looked anxious and said, "Miss, don't go. It's obviously that bastard's." Lin Wanru glanced at him and Lin Yong immediately closed his mouth. "Let's go." County magistrate Wu glanced at her and said lightly. There wasn't much difference between a scholar with no background and a merchant's daughter. Although the matter wasn't destined to be too serious, judging from the intentions of the person behind him, the scholar would probably suffer some physical pain. "Sir, I don't think it's so troublesome," Li Yi said with a smile as he stuffed something into the county magistrate's hand. County magistrate Wu was stunned. Feeling the weight of the thing in his hand, he thought that even if it was a bribe, such a small piece of silver was too small. His face darkened and he said, "Presumptuous. How dare you bribe me? Guards." As County Magistrate Wu said, he raised his hand and intended to throw the silver on the ground fiercely in order to show how impartial and upright he was. Before throwing it, he took a casual glance at it. In an instant, his eyes widened as his arm froze in the air and he couldn't move his eyes away anymore. This jade pendant had just been sent to King Feng's mansion by him some time ago. Today when he saw it again, it still felt the same. County Magistrate Wu's eyelids twitched when he saw two Yamen runners coming out from behind him and walking toward the scholar. He shouted, "What are you doing?" The two Yamen runners looked over in confusion. "Sir, didn't you ask us to?" "Shut up." County Magistrate Wu's face darkened. When he turned around, his expression melted like the spring rain. He put the jade pendant back in Li Yi's hand and said with a smile, "This jade pendant can't be thrown around. Please keep it." Li Yi asked with a smile, "Sir, are we still going to the county office?" "Oh, I'm not going." County Magistrate Wu shook his head fiercely and said, "I'm sorry to disturb you. We'll leave now, right now." Li Yi put away the jade pendant. Zhao Yi did not lie to him. This jade pendant could be exchanged for silver in times of crisis and could also be used to solve difficulties. It was really a must-have for traveling to the Qi Kingdom. Seeing the sudden change of the county magistrate's attitude, the third master of the Lin family was stunned. He opened his mouth but did not say anything. He was not the only one who was stunned. The county magistrate came in a fierce manner and left in a hurry. He did not do anything in between. It was extremely strange. Lin Wanru looked at County Magistrate Wu, and when she turned her head to look at Li Yi, a trace of unfamiliarity suddenly appeared in her eyes. "County Magistrate Wu, what are you doing?" The young man finally came to his senses. He stepped forward and said angrily, "Are you going to bend the law for personal gain?" County Magistrate Wu's face darkened. He did not want to offend the first prince's people, but it did not mean that he was willing to offend the third prince. The person who owned the jade pendant was obviously someone the third prince attached great importance to. County Magistrate Wu did not dare to offend the third prince. After all, the first prince was not the real master in Feng province. He looked at the young man with a sullen face and said coldly, "Do I need you to teach me how to do things?" This scene caused everyone present to be dumbfounded. Today they not only saw the god of fortune in Feng province, but also the county magistrate's internal strife. This trip to the Lin family was not in vain. How dare you? Even in the capital he was a domineering and unscrupulous person. How dare a remote county magistrate treat him like this? The young man was angry and said harshly, "Do you still want to be the county magistrate? I'm afraid you can't make the decision on this matter, can you?" A voice came from outside. After being stunned for a moment, the people immediately looked at the door. Li Yi stretched out his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. Looking at the figures coming in from outside, he murmured, "Zhao Yi, you've gone too far." Chapter 719. Most of the people didn't recognize the few figures who walked in from outside the door. However, the young man at the front who had just spoken looked noble. The two young masters on his left and right were also outstanding and had extraordinary identities. Not only that, but there were also 2 rows of armored and armed guards behind them. At a glance, there were probably dozens of them. It was the first time that most of the people present had seen such a lineup. They didn't know these people, but there was one person that everyone knew. Fortune God of Money, who had left and returned, stood behind the young man as if he was the leader. It was completely different from the situation where he was surrounded by stars. Zhao Xiu and Yang Yanzhou. Lin Wanru looked at the 2 people on her left and right. When her gaze moved to the face of the person in the middle, she finally revealed a shocked expression. "Your Highness King Feng, who's talking?" The young man was in a fit of anger. When he was suddenly rebutted, he subconsciously wanted to turn around and scold back. However, when he turned around and saw the person who walked in, he immediately became dispirited. He trembled and involuntarily took a few steps back, swallowing the words that were already in his throat. "Feng, Your Highness King Feng." Although his identity wasn't ordinary and he had the right to be arrogant, he also knew that there were 2 people in Feng province that he couldn't afford to offend. One was his cousin, the eldest prince of the Qi Kingdom, Prince Heng Zhaozheng. The other was the true ruler of Feng province, King Feng, whom even the eldest prince didn't dare to provoke. He did provoke, but the result wasn't good. The relay station where he lived was surrounded by 1,000 guards. Although his freedom wasn't restricted, he was humiliated, lost the hearts of the people, and even lost his credit. At this moment he was even more depressed than County Magistrate Wu. "Greetings, Your Highness King Feng." County Magistrate Wu bowed apologetically and secretly wiped his cold sweat. As expected, this person's relationship with His Highness King Feng was extraordinary. Not only did he give the jade pendant that represented his identity to King Feng, but he also came personally. If County Magistrate Wu hadn't been quick-witted just now, he would have made a big mistake. If they didn't hear the young man's trembling voice clearly just now, they finally heard the County Magistrate's words just now, which were spoken fluently and clearly in the official language. King Feng. The third master of the Lin family trembled as he said this and immediately knelt down. When the crowd regained their senses, they also lowered their heads and knelt down. Unless it was a special occasion, the people of the Qi Kingdom did not have to kneel to the officials. However, the person in front of them was a genuine prince, the Lord of Feng Province. In this place his reputation was unparalleled. They held this name in awe and veneration. Even the thick-skinned Lin Yong knelt down without hesitation. In the entire courtyard, the only people who hadn't knelt down in front of Zhao Yi were a sloppy old man who was sitting in a seat and eating a chicken drumstick, Li Yi who stood there with a helpless expression, and Lin Wanru who hadn't knelt down because he was holding her wrist. Lin Wanru looked at him and said in a panic, "This is His Highness King Feng. You can't be rude." In the crowd, Bai Yu raised his head and took a look. After being stunned for a moment, a gloating expression quickly appeared on his face. "Come in and talk." Li Yi sighed and turned to walk inside. Lin Wanru was pulled by him. She stared blankly at the people in front of her and unconsciously followed him in. "I'm a little presumptuous. Brother Li, please don't take offense." Zhao Yi laughed heartily and walked up quickly. Dozens of guards rushed into the courtyard and surrounded the hall that the group had entered. The gloating expression on Bai Yu's face froze. Confusion, and deep fear appeared in his eyes. The third master of the Lin family was still kneeling on the spot. He stared blankly at this scene and even forgot to get up. At this moment his heart was pounding. Was the person who spoke just now really the accountant of the Lin family? The gigolo kept by Wanru? How could he speak to His Highness King Feng like that? How could His Highness respond like that? The third master of the Lin family rubbed his forehead with his hand. He felt dizzy. The accountant of the Lin family, the gigolo kept by Wanru. He spoke to him like that and reprimanded him. His Highness King Feng was so polite to him. Not only did he feel dizzy, but his vision also darkened until it was completely black. "Third uncle, old third, what's wrong with you? Wake up." The muffled sound of his head hitting the ground finally brought everyone from the Lin family back to their senses. They all rushed in the direction that the third master of the Lin family had fainted on. In the hall, Li Yi rubbed his forehead. He looked at Zhao Yi and asked, "Isn't this a little too much?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "I'm leaving for the capital tomorrow. I can't disappoint Brother Li, so I thought it was better to come personally." Zhao Yi took a sip of tea and glanced at Lin Wanru. He then looked away and said, "This way, even if I leave, no one in Feng Province will dare to make things difficult for the Lin family. Are you satisfied with this, Brother Li?" Lin Wanru was stunned. The hand that was pouring tea for Li Yi also trembled slightly. Li Yi waved his hand and said helplessly, "Thank you." The third prince's visit to the Lin family was much more useful than Fatty Qian's visit. In the future, no one in Feng Province would dare to do anything to the Lin family even if they had the guts of a bear or a leopard. However, the problem was, how could he cover up this matter? Moreover, before you leave, Zhao Yi should see you off. Zhao Yi looked at him and added, "Don't forget that you still owe me a meal." Li Yi was stunned and asked, "Didn't I pay you yesterday?" Zhao Yi looked at him and said, "Brother Li, did you forget that you didn't pay the bill yesterday? One treats and the other pays." Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is there a problem?" Zhao Yi looked at him deeply and said, "You left in a hurry yesterday. There are some things that you didn't have time to ask. If you go to the capital like this, I won't be at ease." Li Yi took a sip of tea. Zhao Yi looked at him and said, "The imperial edict from the capital arrived yesterday. Many officials in Feng Province were found to have their properties confiscated through the debit and credit method. I'm afraid some of them will be beheaded. The imperial court has been in turmoil for a long time because of this. Brother Li, why don't you tell me if this method is feasible or not?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "You want to implement this method?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "The problem of the Qi Kingdom is already very serious." Li Yi shook his head and said, "If this method is implemented vigorously, the Zhao family will die. If it is not implemented, the world will die." Zhao Yi heard this and frowned slightly. The debit and credit method, turmoil in the imperial court, confiscation of properties, beheading. Lin Wanru's eyes flashed. It seemed that a certain image began to appear in her mind. What will happen if people find out about this method of checking accounts? Actually, it's nothing much. At most, the situation will be unstable, the entire country will be in turmoil, heads will fall and blood will flow like a river. She glanced sideways. It turned out that he hadn't lied to her when he said those words at that time. Zhao Yi was the third prince, so it was impossible for him to remain at the Lin clan for too long. Moreover, he was leaving for the capital tomorrow and would have many other matters to attend to. It was already extremely rare for him to be able to stay at the Lin clan for an hour. Lin Wanru stood in the hall. The scene of his conversation with His Highness King Feng Yangyenzhou and Zhao Xuan appeared in her mind. She finally raised her head and looked at him and asked, "You've known them for a long time?" "I've known the third prince and Zhao Xuan for almost a year. However, to be honest, I've only met them once or twice before." Li Yi thought about it and said, "I met Yangyenzhou a little earlier. He was at Qing and Prefecture in the Jing Kingdom. I've known him since then. He's known as the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture. I've only met him twice or thrice, but we haven't spoken much. I know you have many questions, but before that..." Li Yi looked at her and extended his hand. "Miss Lin, let me reintroduce myself. I am Li Yi." Chapter 720. Lin Wanru looked at him in a daze and asked, "The #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom, Li Yi? The Lin family's banquet, the god of wealth's visit, King Feng's visit, and the scholar she had picked up 2 months ago was the scholar she admired greatly." At this moment, Lin Wanru felt like she was in a dream. What #1 scholar? It's all nonsense. You can't take it seriously. Li Yi's outstretched hand stopped in midair. He said, "But it should be the Li Yi you're thinking of." Lin Wanru's expression was a little confused. After a long time she looked away and murmured, No wonder he copied the handwriting of the Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar Li Yi. It was more similar than Zhao Xuan's. No wonder he never studied or asked about poetry. It was because no one in Feng province or even the Qi Kingdom could compare to him in these matters. No wonder a scholar knew the way of business. Now that she thought about it, those foreign merchants were willing to give so much profit to the Lin family because he was Li Yi of the Jing Kingdom, Li Yi who had defeated the Qi Kingdom's Wenzong, defeated the Qi Kingdom's poet saint, and defeated the Qi Kingdom's diplomatic mission. His reputation had spread throughout the Qi Kingdom a long time ago. Lin Wanru looked down at his outstretched hand and raised her head again. Li Yi's expression was a little awkward. He said, "This is a form of etiquette in my hometown. It's called the handshake ceremony. When two people who don't know each other meet, they will shake each other's hands as a sign of politeness." Lin Wanru was stunned. She reached out to hold his hand and shook her head. She said, "The Jing Kingdom's etiquette is really strange. Since they were already being honest, they might as well be honest with each other." Li Yi reached out and took off the mask on his face. Lin Wanru's expression froze again when she saw this. She looked at the unfamiliar face and asked in a trembling voice, "Is this your original appearance?" Li Yi nodded and said, "Because of some reasons I have no choice but to do so." Lin Wanru sat on the chair and said in a low voice, I want to be alone for a while." When Li Yi walked out of the hall, he bumped into Lin Yong. When he walked over, he asked, "Brother, are my Miss and the Li brothers inside?" Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't go in yet. Let Miss Lin have some time alone." Lin Yong's footsteps suddenly stopped. He turned his head and looked up and down. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face. He said, Can you say something more for me?" Li Yi looked at him and said, "If you come to the Jing Kingdom again, you can come to the capital to find me." "You are the Li brothers?" Lin Yong gasped. The expression on his face was no different from seeing a ghost in broad daylight. "Gone." The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and walked over to ask. Li Yi looked back and waved his hand saying, "Let's go." The Lin family's banquet today had not ended. It should be said that the process of previous banquets had only just begun. However, after so many twists and turns in such a short period of time, many people did not have much interest in the banquet that was only held twice a year. The atmosphere was abnormally quiet. Everyone watched as the Lin family accountant walked out. The scene that had just happened appeared in their minds. They looked at the members of the Lin family with extremely complicated gazes. Suddenly someone exclaimed in a low voice, His appearance. On the other side, the young man named Bayu's face was pale. The two shopkeepers beside him, Ma and Su, looked even worse. Shopkeeper Ma, who had been arrogant just a moment ago, was now crying. He looked at the third master of the Lin family and said with a trembling voice, Third master, I beg you, let us see Wanru again. In the courtyard, Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and asked, Are you done packing? Mississippi Lu nodded. There was originally nothing to pack. When they came, it was empty. When they returned, there was nothing but a few clothes and a chest filled with gold. There was nothing else to bring. Li looked at the sky and said, Then let's go. If we're fast, we'll reach Xuzhou by this time tomorrow. The sloppy old man let out a long sigh. Outside the door, Taoist priest Yuan stood there. There were more than 10 people standing behind him. Even further away, there were many figures in the crowd looking in the same direction. Lin Yong stood at the entrance of Fonglin Garden. His mouth was open and had not closed since the beginning. Li Yi walked over and patted his shoulder. He said, Where's Miss Lin? At home. Lin Yong looked into Fonglin Garden and turned around. He said, Do you want me to call her? No need. Li Yi retracted his hand from his shoulder and waved it casually. Goodbye, big brother Lin. Lin Yong nodded and looked at him in a daze. He said somewhat mechanically, Goodbye. When there was no one in front of him, Lin Yong came back to his senses. He looked at the courtyard next to him and quickly walked over. The furnishings in the courtyard were still the same as before. There was a clay pot at the door of the kitchen that was used to boil medicine. However, there was no longer the fragrance that made him salivate just by smelling it. Thinking of something, he walked into the room and leaned over to look under the bed. After a while, he pulled out a box from under the bed. The box was very big and it was not locked. Lin Yong opened it casually. The next moment he was dazzled by all kinds of colors. Fengzhou Courier Station. You said that Zhao Yi personally went to the Lin family to see the person you met the other day? Zhao Jing looked at the young man who was still a little pale and asked, Who is that person? I've already asked someone to investigate. The young man took out a piece of paper and handed it over. He said, When I came back just now, I saw that they seemed to have left the city. The accountant of the Lin family? Zhao Jing frowned. After looking at it several times, he still had no clue. He's from the Jing kingdom. Why was he so polite? Li Xian. At a certain moment, Zhao Jing seemed to think of something. His expression changed and he immediately said, Chase. In Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong picked up an exquisite Buddha statue and exclaimed, Miss, this is colored glass. He looked down at the box at his feet and said, These are all colored glass. How much is it worth? Lin Wanru's gaze only stayed on the colored glass for a moment before she looked away. Lin Yong's voice came again. Miss, when the Li brothers left just now, you were clearly in the shop. Why didn't you come out? Lin Wanru put down the note in her hand that said, Sell it as soon as possible. She said, Put these things away and go back to work. Brother Lin, make some preparations these days. I plan to let you go to the newly opened shop. Ah? Lin Yong was stunned. When he wanted to ask again, he suddenly turned his head and looked outside. On the street outside Fonglin Garden, a group of soldiers ran quickly, causing a commotion on the street. Lin Yong sighed and said, Feng State City is in chaos again. In King Feng's mansion, Zhao Yi, who was arranging many things after leaving, turned his head and asked, How many people did they bring? The person in front of him said, 100 personal guards. Zhao Yi shook his head and said, Did my brother also go? The first prince is still at the courier station, but the young master of the Yang family went with him. Zhao Yi shook his head and said, Then let him be. Compared to what he had to face and deal with next, these things were no longer enough to divert his attention. The conflict between the factions in the imperial court, the panic in the local counties, and the confrontation with the first prince in the capital. Zhao Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows and murmured, You left so quickly. Chapter 721. Outside Fengzhou City, Li Yi stood at the foot of the city wall and looked up. On the towering city wall, the two words Fengzhou were particularly majestic and majestic. At first glance, one could tell that it was written by a famous master. He looked at the city gate again. After leaving this time, it was uncertain whether he would come back here again. He felt a little guilty about Lin Wanru. She had always taken good care of him and Mississippi Lu, but in return she had lied to him. Although the lies were kind, Li Yi still could not face her calmly before leaving. After a while he collected all his thoughts, turned to look into the distance, waved his hand and said softly, "Let's go." Half an hour later. Go after them. Inside Fengzhou City, a group of fast horses galloped out. The young man in the front was full of excitement and said loudly, "His Highness has ordered that whoever catches them will be heavily rewarded." On the official road, pedestrians and peddlers gave way. The horses galloped, stirring up smoke and dust. In Fonglin Garden, Lin Wanru slowly closed the booklet in her hands. The description on it was extremely detailed and detailed the path that Fragrant Forest Garden would take in the future. Even though she still could not understand some of the methods, she did not doubt it at all after her previous experience. According to this plan, in the end she did not need to do most of the things in the shop by herself. She only needed to make some important decisions occasionally. At that time, it seemed that she would have a deeper control over the Lin family's business than it was now. If she had obtained such a thing 2 months ago, she would have regarded it as a treasure and would have attached great importance to it. But now she was not interested in it at all. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. The tea was still red dates and wolfberry tea, but it did not have the same taste as yesterday. The sun was about to set in the west. After leaving Fonglin Garden, the light in the small room gradually dimmed. Lin Wanru looked at the teacup without any expression on her pretty face. He just sat there quietly. After an unknown period of time, this trace of silence was finally broken. Lin Yong walked in from outside, gently knocked on the door and said, "Miss, the steward of the Qian family is here." "Got it. Let him wait outside for a while." Lin Wanru nodded and slowly stood up. There was no fluctuation in her tone as she spoke. Lin Yong's eyes were a little dazed. He only felt that there seemed to be something different about the miss at this moment. Feng jumped down from a carriage and said, "Son-in-law, there's no hurry to go back. There's a town ahead. Let's rest here for a while. We'll be able to make it back before it gets dark." A team of more than 100 people naturally couldn't carry all kinds of weapons on their waists and swagger through the streets like this. At least they couldn't do that in the Qi Kingdom. The goods on the carts were real goods. This time they had traded glass for a lot of good things from the Qi Kingdom. When they went back they could take them with them. Li Yi nodded and said, "Then let's rest for a while." Feng and the others had traveled almost day and night from the capital city for a month. After arriving in Fengzhou they didn't have a good rest, so they didn't have to rush back. There seemed to be some grievances between the sloppy old man and the Taoist surnamed Yuan. Usually they didn't bother to talk to each other. At this time they were on their own side. Feng saw him take out a milk candy from his bosom and throw it into his mouth. He smacked his lips and said, "Hey Chief Su, give me one." The sloppy old man glanced at him and said, "Not many. Don't be so stingy. Just this once. Don't do it again." A candy flew over from a distance. Feng peeled it and threw it into his mouth. He said, "I thought we were going to do something big with so many people. I didn't expect to come back so easily. Want to do something big?" Li Yi looked back and said, "Here's your chance." Old Feng turned his head to look behind him and his expression froze. At the same time many people around him stood up and looked in a certain direction. They saw smoke and dust billowing in front of them. Occasionally the neighing of horses could be heard. A young man on the horse urged, "Hurry up. They won't be able to go far in the carriage. They should be right in front." Seeing that there seemed to be a caravan in front of them, the young man hurriedly reined in his horse and shouted, "The people in front, stop." He dismounted and swept his gaze across the crowd. He waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. You can go." Before he could finish his sentence, his gaze suddenly stopped on the face of a woman in front of the crowd. After a moment of shock he said with joy, "It's them. Capture them all." He waved his hand. The 100 personal guards behind him immediately dismounted and surrounded the entire caravan. Although the other side seemed to have a lot of people, these people were all the personal guards that Prince Hing had carefully selected. Even if they had to face bandits several times their number, they didn't have to be afraid or worried at all. The young man stood at the front and shouted, "Where is Li Xian?" Hurry up and come out. Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a pain in the back of his leg. He could not help but kneel on the ground. He raised his head and was about to scold them when he saw that the faces of the people inside were all wearing a smile that he could not understand. What he did not understand was where these people had taken out their weapons in the time it took for them to lower their heads. Everyone hurry up. Don't waste time. Fong clenched his fists and was the first to walk out. To let the same number of experts from the Heaven ranking and Earth ranking, as well as the high priests of the intelligence office, deal with these so-called personal guards who at most had some skills. Even if there were a few among them who could be considered to be capable, they would not be able to last long against these people. Even the sloppy old man and the Daoist surnamed Yuan did not make a move. In just a short while among the 100 people, not a single one was still standing. The young man who was still kneeling on the ground was already pale. His body was still trembling and he said in a trembling voice, "You are the personal guards of the eldest prince. If you dare to do anything to us, you will not be able to walk out of the Qi kingdom." The eldest prince's personal guards? Fong cracked his knuckles and said, "Young master, I have a bold idea." Zhao Yi walked out of the Fengzhou courier station and sighed slightly. He had originally planned to leave for the capital today, but now he had to postpone his journey. The young master of the Yang family had disappeared. 100 personal guards of the eldest prince had been stripped naked and tied up in a forest outside Fengzhou city. They were only found in the early hours of this morning. 100 people. Just thinking about that scene gave him a headache. Although he had long expected that the people sent by the eldest prince would fail, he did not expect that it would be in such a way. The eldest prince had long been disgraced. It was not a big deal for him to be disgraced again. However, he could not pretend that he did not see such a thing happening in Fengzhou. Moreover, the missing young master of the Yang family could be considered as an imperial censor. Although it was only a temporary position, it would be difficult to explain it to the Yang family. Zhao Jing walked out with a dark face and said coldly, "Who did you let go? If you can't give me an explanation for this matter, you will have to explain it to my father when we return to the capital." As soon as Zhao Jing finished speaking, an official rushed over and said loudly, "Your Highness, there is an urgent report from Bingzhou. Last night, several imperial censors and 100 personal guards of Prince Heng entered Bingzhou and gathered the officials of Bingzhou. Under Prince Heng's order, the officials of Bingzhou were asked to confess their mistakes and use silver to atone for their crimes. At dawn, they left Bingzhou with 600,000 taels of silver. A bunch of nonsense." Zhao Jing was stunned when he heard this. In the next moment his expression changed and he said coldly, "The imperial censors are all at the relay station. When did I give such an order?" Because of the matter of the silver, he was already at the heart of the struggle. There were countless opinions among the people and there were many voices of dissatisfaction with him in the imperial court. The word silver for discussing guilt could not even be mentioned now. How could he do such a stupid thing? According to the official who just arrived from Bingzhou, those people had the token of Prince Heng's residence and had verified the identity of Imperial Censor Yang. Zhao Jing was stunned for a moment. As if he had thought of something, he immediately asked, "Is that Imperial Censor called Yang Tsong?" The official replied, "Yes." Zhao Jing stood there in a daze. He felt his vision darken and the world around him was spinning. Seeing Prince Heng collapse, the official immediately rushed forward and said in a panic, "Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness, are you all right?" Chapter 722. Have you heard? Prince Heng's men were robbed by a group of strong men yesterday. What do you mean by heard? I saw it with my own eyes. Just this morning hundreds of people were tied naked to trees. That scene tiskedise, immoral. It's really immoral. That's nothing. I also heard that when these people came back they all covered their buttocks. I didn't expect the first prince's men to like this. Could it be that he also... Today there was a lot of discussion in Feng State City. People could be heard talking about something on the streets and alleys. That was because that piece of news was simply too shocking to them. Early in the morning, a woodcutter had just walked into the forest when he saw 100 people being stripped naked and tied to a tree. Perhaps because of the morning, some uncontrollable changes had occurred to their bodies. Just thinking about it was a spectacular sight. That kind of scene and that kind of image would linger in the mind of anyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. Ever since the first prince had come to Feng State, he had been arresting people and discussing the crime. Now he had done such a thing. It had firmly occupied the headlines of Feng State daily. It was believed that this incident would occupy the headlines for a long time. When Lin Yong told Lin Wanru about these things, it was, of course, the edited version. I don't know where this strong man came from. He did things so decisively. It's so satisfying. His face was full of excitement. Then he put something on the table and said, "Miss, this is what you wanted." He looked at the poetry book that he had just bought and asked, "Miss, is the Li brothers really the #1 talent of the Jing kingdom? Were these poems and lyrics also written by him?" Lin Wanru didn't answer. Lin Yong looked around, shook his head and walked out. Anyway, that was what the people outside said. When he bought the poetry book, he was almost squeezed out by the young ladies. He really didn't expect that a pretty boy like the Li brothers would be so popular with women. Lin Yong walked to the entrance of Fonglin Park and looked in a certain direction out of habit. He couldn't help but lick his lips. It's almost time to eat again. At this time, in a county town located at the border of the Qi Kingdom's Qing province, a group of over 100 caravans had stopped. They were seated in the largest restaurant in the county town. That's all there is to making money. Fong didn't forget to sigh as he chewed on the pork shoulder. He had the capital to be arrogant. In one night he had produced 600,000 taels of silver. Anyone could be a little arrogant. However, there was a slight delay in time. Bing province was not far from Feng province. Presumably they had already received the news. With more than 100 people and so many carriages and goods, it was destined that they would not be able to travel very quickly. The original plan might have to be slightly altered. Yang Liuqing took out a map and spread it on the table. He pointed at a place in front of them and said, "Marshal Uncle, with our current speed, it will take us 1.5 days to reach Chongzhou. If we travel at top speed from Fengzhou, we can reach there in a day. So we can't go back through Chongzhou. Is there any other way?" Yang Liuqing nodded. He used his finger to draw on the map and said, "If we go west from here, we can go around Chongzhou. It might take us a few days, but it's safe enough." Although they had 2 grandmasters and over 100 top-notch martial arts masters, it wouldn't be a problem for them to break through a city that wasn't heavily guarded. They had to go back. It was better not to cause so much trouble. If they really did that, they were afraid that casualties would be unavoidable. It was not worth it. Li Yi looked at the map. Yang Liuqing explained, "If we go west from here for another day, we will almost reach the border of the Wu Kingdom. We can go around here. This is the chaotic land where the Qi Kingdom, Jing Kingdom and Wu Kingdom intersect. If we go through here, we can go around Chongzhou. In another 2 days we will reach Xuzhou." Fong asked doubtfully, "Didn't you say that place is very chaotic? I heard that there are countless mountain bandits and bandits running amok. Will there be trouble?" Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "This mountain range stretches on and on. There are countless mountain bandits and bandits here. But the really powerful mountain bandits are all in the depths. The power is complicated and the specific situation is not that simple. In short, there are only some small bandits on the periphery. There are no more than dozens of people, so there's nothing to be afraid of." Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked, "You are very familiar with this place?" Yang Liuqing was stunned. She nodded and said, "I learned about it when I came here. There shouldn't be much difference." The slovenly old man looked at Yang Liuqing meaningfully and spat out the chicken bone in his mouth. He said, "This girl is right. Although that place is a little chaotic, as long as we don't go too deep and encounter those hard-to-chew bones, there won't be any big problem." Even the slovenly old man said that it was hard to chew bones. It seemed that that place was really not simple. Li Yi looked at the map carefully. This time they just passed the periphery, so there shouldn't be any problem. He nodded and said, "Then let's go here." King of Shu's mansion, Xuzhou. King of Shu paced anxiously in the hall with a gloomy expression. When footsteps came from outside the hall, he immediately asked before the person who came in said anything, "How is it? Any news from there?" The person bowed and said, "Your Highness, I have confirmed it from the people of the Secret Intelligence Office. They did find County Marquis Li in the Qi Kingdom and will come back soon." Bang! Sure enough, he is in the Qi Kingdom. King of Shu punched the table and squeezed out a few words through his teeth. These days he had almost mobilized all the government offices in Suzhou and even sent out the guards of the king's mansion. In order to find him he had spent a lot of effort. He didn't expect that Li Yi was not in the Jing kingdom or Suzhou at all. Didn't that mean that all the effort he put in was for naught? Thinking of this, King of Shu immediately felt that he had been fooled. One person thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Your Highness, they will return to Suzhou eventually. Why don't we? Suzhou has now been taken over by the Secret Intelligence Office." In the crowd, Zhang Xian glanced at the person and said, "At first General Fan thought the same as you. Now grass can grow on his grave." Thinking of something, the person stopped talking and his face immediately turned pale. The people of the Secret Intelligence Office from the Jing Kingdom wanted to take over the military power on the first day they arrived in Suzhou. Suzhou was far away from the emperor, so the orders from the Jing Kingdom had little effect here. It had always been like this. On that day, a garrison general said that the request of the Secret Intelligence Office was unreasonable and he would not hand over the power even if he died. As a result, he really died. He had just been buried not long ago, but not long after, grass would grow on his grave. King of Shu didn't speak, but the blue veins on his forehead couldn't help throbbing. As the first prince, he was suppressed every step he took in the Jing Kingdom and was even beaten in front of the civil and military officials. Now he came to Suzhou and couldn't make decisions on his own fief. This was the most depressing thing in his heart. The atmosphere in the hall was a little depressing. At this time, another servant of the prince's mansion came in and said, "Your Highness, young Master Fong Yongfeng wants to see you." King of Shu nodded and said, "Let him in." Chapter 723. Your Highness, King of Shu. The young man surnamed Fong came in from outside. He first bowed to King of Shu and then turned his head to look around. King of Shu looked around, waved his hand and said, "You can leave now." Hearing this, everyone left one after another. Only King of Shu and the young man surnamed Fong were left in the hall. King of Shu looked at him and said lightly, "Li Yi is coming back." What? Fong Yong's expression changed immediately. "He went to the Qi kingdom recently and will be back soon." King of Shu looked at him and asked, "Can your people get rid of him before he arrives in Suzhou?" Fong Yong's expression changed for a while. He shook his head and said, "No. The power of the holy religion in Suzhou was weak. Her Majesty was injured and had not recovered yet. A large number of masters gathered in Suzhou some time ago suddenly appeared and then disappeared. It was said that they went to the Qi kingdom. Now that he thought about it, it must have something to do with Li Yi. With the remaining power of the holy religion in Suzhou, even if another guru came, they would be at risk of being destroyed, let alone so many masters. The right thing to do was to escape before they came back. They didn't even dare to take back the token of the Blue Dragon ambassador. How could they have other plans? Didn't you say that you have 100,000 followers? King of Shu looked at him angrily and said, "Didn't you say that there are countless masters in your sect? You can't even handle such a small matter. How can I believe you?" The young man surnamed Fong was expressionless. He lowered his head and said nothing. Hearing the voice of King of Shu coming from inside, full of anger and mania, the two guards at the door looked at each other and immediately became very cautious. At this time His Highness could not be provoked. He would even severely punish them for not standing properly. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. Fortunately, it didn't take long before young Master Fong, who often came to the king's mansion, came out. He didn't look very good and there was no sound in the hall. The two of them heaved a long sigh of relief because they didn't suffer any punishment because of their posture. Young Master Fong was in trouble. From the looks of it, he must have been scolded badly by the King of Shu. The two of them wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads. When they put down their hands, a voice came from the side. "Who allowed you to wipe your sweat?" The King of Shu looked at the two of them with cold eyes and said, "Each of you, go down and receive 50 strokes of the cane." The two of them looked at each other and tightened their grip on the sabers at their waists. In the end, they loosened their grip. At the same time, the youth surnamed Fong walked out of the King of Shu's residence. Two blue-robed men came forward and respectfully said, "Protector." The youth with the surname Fong turned around and looked at the gate of the King of Shu's residence. He said coldly, "We'll do it tonight. Son-in-law, shall we make our move?" Fong rubbed his hands together and looked excitedly at a group of dozens of people with red scarves covering their heads. He turned around and asked Li Yi. Li Yi could finally confirm that Fong really had the genes of a bandit. They had already destroyed 3 bandit dens along the way, and after a while the number would increase to 4. There was indeed a reason why this place was known as the Land of Chaos. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had encountered 3 groups of bandits with more than a dozen people. The last group even had more than 100 people. Such a group of bandits would be considered a small force in other places. However, in this place they could only stay in the periphery. Usually they would go down the mountain to rob livestock and food. Occasionally small caravans would pass by and they would be fat sheep. If they ventured deeper into the mountains, they would either be annexed by other large bandit groups or lose their lives in the process of fighting for territory. In the beginning, Fong was still worried that there would be trouble bringing so many gold and silver goods through a place where bandits ran rampant. After encountering it twice, he gradually began to realize that being a bandit was his original profession. The group had already been moving for 2 days. Not only did the goods not decrease, they even increased. The 3 waves of mountain bandits were all suppressed by the group and their dens were raided. Unfortunately, the mountain bandits' nests weren't rich at all. Old Fong and the others only took the items that caught their eye and left the rest of the scrap metal untouched. A group of dozens of people like the one in front of them could be wiped out with just a few people. After a while, Fong came over with a smile and said, "Young master, after we arrive in Shuzhou, do you want to put the goods down first and come again?" This guy was really addicted to being a bandit. He had been in a state of excitement for the past 2 days. If he called the people from Willow Leaf Village, would they sweep all the nearby mountains? Except for the 2 gurus, the rest of the 100 or so people were the best of the best. If these people really followed him and became bandits, perhaps his original dream would come true. Li Yi now wanted to grow wings and fly back. He didn't have the time to do this. He glared at him and said, "Hurry up. It's getting dark. Let's find a place to rest first and ask those bandits where their dens are." Fong responded and walked over. He slapped the head of the bandit and said, "You're still wearing a red headscarf. You're a disgrace to us bandits. Tell me, where is your stronghold?" The bandit leader asked in a trembling voice, "You are also bandits?" Fong slapped his head again and said, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Lead the way." The bandit leader looked around. There were many people as strong as this strong man. One person could beat more than 10 of them. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. They were all bandits, but why was the gap between them so big? Fong slapped him again and said, "You're still looking. It's just ahead." All the bandits sighed and felt sad. They were all bandits. Why did bandits make things difficult for other bandits? Li Yi rode on the horse and followed behind Mississippi Lu. At a certain moment, he inadvertently looked up and saw the expression on her face and the flickering light in her eyes. He couldn't help but be stunned. 100 miles ahead, a group of nearly 100 people was slowly traveling on a rugged mountain path. "Lady Fong, we've been walking for a day. Do you want to stop and rest?" The man with the surname Fong lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked with concern. The middle-aged Daoist nun was sitting cross-legged in the carriage. Her face was pale and she looked rather weak. She opened her eyes and said, "It's getting dark. We'll go a little further and set up camp here before it gets dark." "Yes." The man with the surname Fong responded and immediately waved his hand behind him. He said loudly, "Move faster. We'll set up camp here before it gets dark." The man with the surname Fong tripped on a rock on the mountain path and staggered. After he steadied himself, he looked down and revealed an extremely gloomy expression. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about running into Li Yi while traveling through Chong province, they wouldn't be able to fight against those martial arts experts with their current manpower. Why would they take this path? At this moment, his heart was undoubtedly filled with deep resentment towards that detestable name. What he couldn't get over was that this person was clearly a great enemy of the holy religion. Yet the Lady Fong had given him the token of the Blue Dragon Envoy. He was afraid that there would be no small amount of trouble in the future. Thinking of this, he raised his head and glanced at the carriage in front of him. A look of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. Chapter 724. Feng Province, which had been shrouded in darkness for a long time, finally saw the light of dawn today. The reason was that the eldest prince and a group of supervising censors would leave Feng province today. The actions of these people in Feng province had a great impact on the people of Feng province. Even a 3-year-old child knew that the first prince was not a good person. The words supervising censor were enough to stop children from crying at night. Of course, these people, including the eldest prince, had now become a joke in Feng province. 100 personal guards made a fool of themselves in front of so many people. Early that morning, another censor with the surname Yang was sent back from Bing province. He had been kidnapped by a group of robbers. Perhaps they were worried that the officials of the capital would be involved and the matter would be blown out of proportion, so they didn't make things difficult for him. Some insiders said that when the censor was sent back, other than becoming a bit deranged, there was nothing wrong with him. After the eldest prince and his entourage were sent out of the city gate, the entire Feng province ushered in a carnival. The night market, which had not been opened for a long time, was opened early when the sky had just darkened. Feng province was brightly lit and every family was in a jubilant mood. Lin Yong looked at the lights coming from the small courtyard next to Fonglin Garden. He walked through the courtyard and knocked on the door saying, "Miss, the shopkeepers of the Ma, Su and Bai families have been standing in front of the Lin family's door for a day and a night. Old master asked me to ask you if you want to see them." "It's too late. Let's talk about it tomorrow morning." After a long time, a voice came from the room again. "Tomorrow." Lin Yong nodded and looked up at the sky. There were no stars, so he shook his head and said, "Look at the weather, it might rain tonight." They are standing there in the cold. "I don't know where the Li brothers have gone to." In a small county town dozens of miles away from Feng province. In the relay station, Zhao Jing looked at Zhao Yi and said in a deep voice, "I was framed." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "I know. They kidnapped Yang Kong. He has the token of Prince Heng's mansion," Zhao Jing said again. Zhao Yi nodded again and said, "I know. It's useless even if I know." He turned his head to look at Zhao Jing and said, "In the end, the matter of discussing the silver of guilt was caused by Imperial brother and Imperial father does not know." Zhao Yi sighed and said, "When you return to the capital this time, I'm afraid you have to make preparations." Zhao Jing clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He couldn't understand how he, the Grand Crown Prince of the Qi Kingdom, had ended up in such a predicament when he had the upper hand. Who was that master who didn't leave his name? Neither the eldest prince of the Qi Kingdom nor the eldest prince of the Jing Kingdom could figure it out. The king of Shu's eyes were bloodshot as he smashed an inkstone on the table. The inkstone struck the forehead of a guard who was kneeling below. Blood immediately gushed out, but the guard did not dare to wipe it with his hands. "Trash, all of you are trash. It's already been 3 days and not a single clue has been found." The county magistrate of Yong County stood in the corner. Beside him, Jiangxian lowered his head and said nothing. 3 days ago, the treasury of the king of Shu's mansion was ransacked by a group of bandits. They dug a secret tunnel from the outside all the way into the treasury. It was not discovered until the next day. At that time, the treasury was already empty. All the gold and silver treasures had been stolen. Not even a copper coin was left for the king of Shu. In other words, the king of Shu was probably the poorest prince in the Jing kingdom now. If it wasn't for his identity, he would be worrying about what to eat for his next meal. In the past 3 days, the king of Shu had lost count of how many times he had lost his temper. However, 3 days had passed, and the entire Shuzhou had not been able to find out who the culprit was. Jiangxian could understand the king of Shu. If the small box he had hidden under his bed had been stolen, he might have been even more furious than the king of Shu. After all, the entire Shuzhou was the king of Shu's fief. He could easily plunder it a few times and obtain countless taels of silver. Jiangxian's private savings were accumulated little by little. "Get out, all of you, get out of here. If you can't get it back, don't come back to see me." The king of Shu overturned a few tables and chairs. Seeing this, the crowd immediately retreated. Walking out of the mansion, Jiangxian looked at the county magistrate of Yong County and said, "Feng Yong and the others left 3 days ago. Could it be?" The county magistrate shook his head and said, "Impossible. Given his relationship with Her Highness, how could he do such a thing?" Jiangxian nodded and simply kept his mouth shut. The man named Feng Yong obviously had an unusual relationship with Her Highness. Every time they talked, he would drive them away. These things were not something they could handle. In addition, there was another thing that made him feel a myriad of emotions in his heart. In fact, he could no longer describe the specific feelings. That person was finally coming back. Zhou Xian sighed and looked in the direction of the city gate with an indescribable expression. After leaving Shuzhou and going south for another 100 miles, it was the chaotic place that people avoided. There were countless mountain bandits and bandits in the mountains. They often went down the mountains to loot caravans and disturb people's lives. Because of its special geographical location, both the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom adopted a laissez-faire attitude towards this place, which directly made the bandits there more rampant. Every night, if you looked down from the highest peak, you would find that the mountains were lit up with many lights, which showed that there were many bandits in the mountains. At this moment, a voice rang out from one of the thatched cottages on one of the mountains that was lit up with a faint light. "Big brother, they outnumber us. Why don't we run away? The way down the mountain has been blocked by them. How can we run away? Tomorrow morning we will fight to the death with them. At that time we brothers will fight to the death for Big Brother. Big Brother just needs to escape and go back to live a good life with sister-in-law. Big Brother, please take care of our family." "What are you talking about? I brought you out. How can I run away alone?" Inside the thatched cottage, the candlelight was weak and swaying, but the inside of the cottage was not dark. Perhaps it was because there was a shiny bald head that reflected the light in all directions. Several bandits stepped forward and tried to persuade him. "Big brother, all of you stop talking." The bald bandit waved his hand and said, "Since you've embarked on this path, this day will come sooner or later. Tomorrow find an opportunity and run away if you can. Staying alive is more important than anything else." He looked at the endless swaying shadows of trees outside the window and sighed in his heart. He had thought that with his hot blood he and his brothers could make a name for themselves here. He didn't expect that after only 2 months, they would be forced into a dead end. In this place where the strong preyed on the weak would either die or be swallowed up by the stronger ones. 2 months ago they had just dispersed a small bandit group here, but they didn't expect that 2 months later, they would make a comeback and there were already dozens of them. The few of them would never be able to defeat them. Now that their only escape route down the mountain had been blocked, it was impossible to escape. They could only fight with all their might. The bald bandit collected his thoughts and turned to look at the crowd. He said, "If anyone escapes tomorrow, remember to help me pass a message to my tigress." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the thatched cottage was kicked open. A figure that was as sturdy as the bald bandit blocked the door. A middle-aged woman dressed in coarse clothes stood there, looking at him and saying coldly, "If you have anything to say it to me personally now." The woman's appearance was ordinary, but her figure was extremely sturdy. However, the most eye-catching thing was not her sturdy figure, but the 2 mountain-splitting hammers in her hands, and her head that was also shiny without a single strand of hair. Especially after she walked into the thatched cottage, the entire room seemed to have become much brighter. "Why are you here?" The bald man was stunned, his face revealing a look of disbelief as he blurted out loudly. After speaking, he seemed to realize something and subconsciously retracted his head. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "Why are you here?" Chapter 725. The so-called mountain bandits were so weak that it was disappointing. Along the way they had destroyed many of the bandits' nests, but there was not a single casualty. Not to mention death, there was not even a single injury. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to go back, he really wanted to stay here for 10 days or half a month and sweep through the surroundings. It was a virtue to pluck feathers when a goose passed. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. In any case, he had encountered nothing good. He would just treat it as getting rid of evil for the people. Fong revealed a look of anticipation and said, "Young master, why don't you think about it again? We've already come this far. It would be a pity if we don't do something big." Li looked at him and said, "Why don't we go back and leave some people here for you?" "No, of course I want to go back with you." Fong shook his head. It was fine for him to stay here for a few more days, but he couldn't stand to stay here for a long time. "I'm going to the front to relieve myself." He turned over and got off the horse. When he walked forward, someone followed him. "Brother Fong, I'll go with you." Li Yi turned around and asked Yang Liuqing, How long until we get to Shuzhou? Yang Liuqing replied, 2 more days. Li Yi calculated. From Shuzhou to the capital, if they traveled day and night like before and went by the nearest waterway, it would take about a month. It would be a little slower to go back, but it would take about a month and a half to get there. This time he didn't leave home for a long time, less than 4 months, but it happened to be at a time when he shouldn't have left. But fortunately, everything was still in time. Not far behind Li Yi, the sloppy old man threw a candy into his mouth, shook the reins and took 2 steps forward. He looked at Yang Liuqing and asked, "How is that old guy Yang Wanli? He's not dead yet, right?" Yang Liuqing glanced at him and said lightly, "I don't know what you're talking about and I don't know any Yang Wanli." This old man still recognizes Cloud Piercer. Back then Yang Wanli used this move to fight me to a draw. But that was a matter of decades ago, you weren't even born yet. The sloppy old man smacked his lips and said, "For the sake of martial arts, that old guy even gave up the throne. He definitely wouldn't teach this move to an outsider. Could it be that you're his daughter?" After saying this, he shook his head and denied, "That's also impossible. That old guy can't find a woman. He only likes swords and no woman would like him. Could it be that you're his disciple? And I've never heard of him accepting a disciple." Yang Liuqing glanced at him and asked, "Dare I ask if Senior has a family?" The sloppy old man's expression froze. He looked at her and said with dissatisfaction, "Little girl, what do you mean by that? This old man is different from that old guy." It was difficult for them to break through. Seeing that his brothers had been subdued, the bald man was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. When he tried to charge out with all his strength, a knife struck his leg and he immediately knelt on the ground. "My husband!" The valiant woman shouted and waved her hammers to force the crowd away. She guarded him by her side and gripped her hammers tightly. Her eyes coldly stared at the surroundings. The scarred man dismounted from his horse and came to the bald man's brothers who had been tied up. He waved his knife and said, "If you swing your hammers again, I will cut them once. I wonder how long these people can last." The valiant woman's expression finally changed. She looked down at the bald man and threw the 2 hammers to the ground. When the surrounding bandits saw this, they immediately put their weapons against his neck. The bald man lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry. I've implicated you." The valiant woman glared at him and said, "We're going to die. What's the point of saying this now?" Then she raised her head and looked at the scarred man. She said coldly, "If you want to kill me, then kill me. Give me a quick death. Don't talk nonsense." "Give you a quick death?" The scarred man glanced at her and said, "In your dreams, men tie them up for me first." 2 figures shuttled through the dense forest. A thin figure turned his head and asked, "Brother Fong, how did you train your strength?" "It's so scary." Fong patted him on the shoulder and said, "You'd better not think about it. With your body you can't take it." Now that he thought of the days when he pushed the merry-go-round, he still felt his legs tremble. The young man looked at him and said with a smile, "Tell me. I was born with it. It's useless for you to train." Fong shook his head and said, "However, if you want to train harder, it's not impossible. When we go back this time, the amusement park in the brothel will be built soon. You can report to me then." The young man hurriedly nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Fong." Fong nodded and said, "Let's go to the front. I'm about to suffocate." The 2 of them passed through a thicket and stood on a low slope. They untied their pants and closed their eyes. Soon the sound of water could be heard from below. When they were done and opened their eyes, they couldn't help but be stunned. Just below the low slope, several figures were tightly tied up. They were kneeling on the ground and looking at them in a daze. Looking down, there were dozens of figures in front of them. Each of them looked fierce. It was obvious that they were bandits in the mountain. Fong's body couldn't help but tremble. He pulled up his pants and looked down. "I'm just peeing. You guys continue." The scarred man wiped the water off his face and gritted his teeth. "Catch them and cut them off." Chapter 726. Cut. Fong looked down, then looked at the scarred man and said, "That's a bit too much." The scarred man suppressed his disgust and wiped his face with his sleeves, saying in a low voice, "They should be their accomplices. Capture them first." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits had already climbed up the slope. The youth beside Fong fastened his pants, then turned to look at him and asked, "Brother Fong, should we do it?" Fong looked around and nodded, "Let's do it." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits flew down the slope. While the scarred man was still in a daze, a black shadow had already pressed down from above and kicked him off his horse. His expression was twisted in pain, looking extremely hideous. He gritted his teeth and said, "Hurry up and attack." Without needing his order, the other bandits had no choice but to attack. That was because the tall and short, one muscular and one skinny man, had already come down the slope and were charging at the bandits. Although the skinny youth was thin and small, his leg skills were truly impressive. The bald man and the others were kneeling on the ground and couldn't see him move at all. It was also because he hadn't made a move at all. Just the indistinct leg shadows were enough to dazzle the eyes. The bandits that approached him all fell to the ground with footprints on their bodies. As for the burly man, he and the others looked in a certain direction. Even in a situation where he was tied up, he still revealed an extremely shocked expression. The burly man didn't have any weapons. He only relied on his iron fists and body. No matter how dense the sword shadows were, they couldn't touch him at all. It was hard to imagine that such a large person could be so nimble, and the bandits that came into contact with his fists all fell to the ground without exception. Just now he had even used his body to send 3 bandits flying several meters away. This wasn't a human, he was clearly a ferocious beast. The skinny youth kicked another person and couldn't help but praise, "Brother Fong, you're amazing." Fong looked at him and said casually, "Kid, you're not bad either. You purposely didn't want to be on the heaven roll, right?" The skinny youth smiled and said, "The heaven roll is just a target. Even if I go up, I'll still be behind. It's better to be safe." The bald woman stared blankly at the two who were like tigers in a flock of sheep. She turned her head and asked, "Where did you recruit these people from?" The bald man was stunned and murmured, I don't know." The scarred man sat on the ground, his eyes wide open. In just a short while, only a dozen or so of his subordinates were still standing. From the looks of it, the remaining people wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Who the hell were these 2 fellows? His face revealed a look of horror. He looked left and right and his eyes stopped on the bald man. "Stop." Old Fong and the skinny young man were fighting with all their might when a voice suddenly rang in their ears. Turning his head, he saw the scar-faced man place his knife on the neck of the bald man kneeling on the ground. He shouted, "You two stop right now. If you don't stop, I'll..." Fong looked at him and asked, "What will you do?" The scar-faced man said sternly, "I will kill him." "Then go ahead and kill him." Fong kicked the last bandit to the ground and crossed his arms. "It's not like I know him." The bald man's eyes widened. The scar-faced man's angry expression froze. He swallowed and said, I really will kill. If you want to kill me, then kill me." Fong looked at him and said, "Do you think I'll be threatened by you? Even if my head falls off, I'll still be a good man in 18 years. The bald man, seeing the monster walking toward him, the scar-faced man revealed a look of fear. He said with a trembling voice, Don't come over." Fong glanced at the thin young man. The thin young man nodded and turned into a blur. A flying rock flew through the air and knocked the knife out of the scar-faced man's hand. The knife and the rock collided, producing a crisp sound. The bald man's ears rang and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the knife was stuck in a tree. His back was drenched in cold sweat. That rock had almost brushed past his ear. If it had been just a little more, wouldn't his head have been split open? The scar-faced man's hand also split open from the recoil. He took a few steps back and actually ran without hesitation. The bald man looked left and right, a trace of relief appearing on his face. No matter who these 2 people were, they were finally safe today. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, he suddenly heard a cacophony of noises, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The bald man turned around and saw a cloud of dust rising from the road behind him, as well as the silhouettes within it. His face paled once more. After the sound of reining in a horse, a tall and strong man looked at the scar-faced man. He frowned and said, "Scar, dozens of people can't beat these few. What do you do?" The scar-faced man was stunned for a moment before a trace of joy appeared on his face. He said loudly, "Master, we had already caught these people, but we don't know where these 2 troublesome people came from. That's why..." The scar-faced man waved his hand and said, That's enough. This time there's a big caravan passing through here. This is a big fat sheep. If you alarm me, be careful of your head." The scar-faced man was stunned. He didn't know which big caravan would dare to pass through here. Wasn't it stupid? However, he quickly recovered and pointed at the two people in front of him. He said, "It's those two guys in front. Master, be careful." The thin man looked at the dense crowd in front of him and asked, "Brother Fong, are we going to do it this time?" "Do it my ass." Fong glared at him. No matter how he looked at it, there were more than 200 people in front of him. If they really did it, the two of them would die of exhaustion. He quickly tore the ropes on the people who were tied up and said, "What are you waiting for? Run." After the ropes were untied, the bald man immediately stood up. Ignoring his bleeding thigh, he cupped his fists and said, "Thank you, hero, for saving us." Fong waved his hand and looked at the opposite side. He looked back and murmured, "They should be here soon, right?" "What?" the bald man asked doubtfully. As soon as the words left his mouth, he saw a carriage coming from the end of the road in front of him. Then 2 carriages, 3 carriages. When more than 10 carriages, which were obviously loaded with goods, came from the front, the bald man was stunned on the spot. He finally understood why the notorious Xianxia tiger of this generation would come out personally. This caravan is really stupid. How stupid must they be to pass through the fringe so openly? "Brothers, the fat sheep is here." The strong-looking man rode on his horse with an excited look on his face. He said loudly, "After this, it will be enough for us to enjoy ourselves for a while. Keep your spirits up." Fong looked at the opposite side and clenched his fists. He turned back and said in a loud voice, "Move faster, it's time to work." As soon as the man's voice faded, many figures came out from the caravan. They were armed with all kinds of weapons and walked towards them with ease. The bald man felt his mind go blank. Have these people gone mad? Or has the world changed? Since when did fat sheep dare to attack mountain bandits? Aren't they rushing to their deaths? Who do they think they are? Do they think they are as powerful as these two? When the strong-looking man saw this, he smiled instead of getting angry. He waved his hand and said, "What are you waiting for? Go." When the two parties collided, the bald man's mouth was agape and he couldn't close it. His brothers and the bald woman were also dumbfounded. Like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. What bullsh*t Xianxia tiger. His name is so resounding, and he even said that he's the most powerful bandit leader of this generation. It's all bullsh*t. In an instant he was dragged down from his horse by one of the bandits. After 2 kicks he lay motionless on the ground. The others were also like chickens and dogs that couldn't withstand a single blow. No, it wasn't that they were chickens and dogs, it was that they had encountered a group of monsters. One person, even if they could defeat one of them, it would still be fine. Have you ever seen someone catch a blade or an arrow empty-handed? Have you ever seen someone punch someone? Have you ever seen a horse fall to the ground with a single punch? Have you ever seen bandits rob merchant caravans? Have you ever seen a merchant caravan robbing a bandit? He had really seen it. When the burly man stepped on Xianxia tiger's head and asked him where their lair was and what valuable items they had, the bald man felt as though the faith he had built up over a long period of time had crumbled. Who are the bandits and who are the fat sheep? Is this world still the same as the world I'm familiar with? Chapter 727. Robbing was something that could be left to others. If a grandmaster were to do it himself, it would seem rather degrading. The sloppy old man would at most stand at the side and watch from afar when they attacked. However, although these people looked average to him, there was no need to watch from the side when dealing with a few bandits. Therefore, the sloppy old man would always watch from the side. This time he only glanced at them as usual. When he looked in a certain direction, his gaze paused for a moment, then he walked over and asked in surprise, "Why is it you again?" "A senior." The bald bandit also recognized this senior whom he had met a few times. A hint of surprise flashed across his face, and he immediately bowed and spoke respectfully. The sloppy old man looked him up and down. Seeing his disheveled appearance, he said, "Why are you in such a sorry state again?" The bald bandit lowered his head awkwardly. After being hit 3 times in a row, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he could not maintain his composure. The bald woman raised her eyebrows and looked at the sloppy old man. She said angrily, Who are you? My man, I need you to tell me. Shut up. The bald bandit knew how terrifying this old man was. After glaring at her, he hurriedly turned to look at the sloppy old man and said with a smile, "My lowly wife has not seen the world," and spoke arrogantly. "Senior, please don't blame her, don't blame her." Seeing this, the few people behind the bald bandit widened their eyes. "Lowly? Who are you calling lowly? I haven't seen you for a few days and you've grown up." The bald woman pulled his ear and said fiercely, "Get over here." Seeing their big brother being dragged to the side, the bandits all had expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. Having escaped from death, their hearts that were hanging in suspense were finally at ease. Li Yi and Mississippi Lu walked over and looked at them. He said in surprise, "Why are you guys again?" The bandits looked awkward. Li Yi looked at the sloppy old man and asked, "Sue knows them too?" The sloppy old man nodded and said with a chuckle, "That little baldy is an interesting person." Li Yi looked at them and asked, "Tell me, why are you guys here?" Looking at the three people opposite them, the awkwardness on their faces deepened. After being a bandit for so long, he really didn't have the face to say it again. The other side. The bald woman let go of the bald man's ear and asked, "What's going on?" The bald man shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I've only met them twice before." The bald woman nodded and squatted down. She looked at his wound and asked, "Is your injury okay?" "Skin injury." The bald man shook his head and suddenly said, "Let's go back and live a good life from now on. We won't be bandits anymore." The woman coldly snorted and said, "You don't want to inherit your father's dying wish? Are you satisfied if you don't make a name for yourself? Aren't you afraid that I'll continue beating you up when we get back?" The bald bandit rubbed his bald head and smiled awkwardly. "Living a good life is better than hanging my head on a belt. If you want to hit me, then hit me. But, can you bear to hit me? Dead man." The bald woman glared at him and said, "Heal your wounds first. We'll talk about the future in the future." The bald man smiled foolishly. Li Yi didn't expect the bald bandit's road to be so tortuous. Nothing could happen more than 3 times, but he had been defeated 3 times in a row. His perseverance alone was enough to move people. It would be a waste of talent if such a person didn't become a bandit. Especially this kind of person who had principles, a bottom line, perseverance, and was willing to work hard. There weren't many of them. The Fringe was a place that he had set his sights on for a long time. But because of the long distance and his lack of understanding of the place, he didn't take any substantial action. This time he just happened to pass by. Just as Fong said, it wasn't easy to come here. If he didn't do something, it would be a waste of an opportunity. This place was a treasure trove waiting to be mined. Seeing that the bandits were all wounded, Li Yi beckoned to Fong and said, "Call a few people over and help them tend to their wounds." Then he saw the bald man limping over with a wound on his thigh that was still bleeding. Li Yi pointed at him and said, "Your wound needs to be tended to too." "No need." The bald man shook his head. Before he could say the word "no need," the bald woman pinched him hard on his waist. Not long after, the bald man saw that someone was sewing his thigh with a needle and thread. He asked in surprise, "Why does this thing look like it's sewing a pocket? Will it work?" The bald woman behind him smacked his head and said, "Shut up. You talk too much. It'll heal faster if you stitch it up." Li Yi was a little surprised. Although this bald man was unlucky, he was a real man. He didn't make a sound while stitching up his wound and even looked at it curiously. Li Yi didn't know if he was really good at enduring or just stupid. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "You haven't given up after so many times. Do you really like being a bandit?" The bald man raised his head and waved his hand. "I quit. I wanted to be a bandit before, but I didn't know what it was like to be a bandit. Now it seems that I'd rather go back and live my life. It's better than being hacked to death." He really understood now. It wasn't just a caravan. Any random robber on the road could wipe them out. What was the point of being a bandit? His future was bleak. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at the bald man and said, "Young people should have dreams. Don't give up just because of a little setback. Nothing can be done in one go. Only by enduring hardship can you achieve success." The bald bandit sighed. "Sigh, I'm not young anymore. Middle-aged people should also struggle. As long as life is alive, the battle will not stop. One couldn't only care about oneself. One had to persuade others to do good. Li looked at the bald bandit and asked, touch your conscience. Do you really want to give up? The bald man showed a hint of hesitation. After a moment he sighed and said, we've all lived a hard life. I don't want to rob those poor people. As for the caravan. The bald man turned his head to look at the person lying on the ground not far away. He didn't say anything. What he wanted to say was that a caravan with brains wouldn't take this path. They needed to go down the mountain and rob further away. They also needed to steal business from other bandits. Brainless caravans. They couldn't compete with brainless caravans. Robbing the poor and robbing caravans is the lowest level of bandits. Li patted his shoulder and said, robbing bandits is the king of bandits. Robbing bandits? The bald man looked at him with a dazed expression. Crush. Fong walked over with large strides and threw a large bag on the ground. He said, young master, these were found on the bodies of those bandits. I heard from them that there are even more good things in their stronghold. I've already sent people over. The bald man looked over and saw that the bag was filled with gold and silver. There was quite a lot of them. He was stunned once again. He thought about the scholar's words again. Gradually, a look of understanding appeared on his face. He licked his lips and a strange light shone from his eyes. Chapter 728. A soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. A tailor who didn't want to be a cook wasn't a good coachman. A bandit who didn't want to be the king of bandits wasn't a good baldy. The bald man really wanted to be a bandit. His grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was a bandit. It was too long ago to trace back that far. All in all, his ancestors had this fine tradition for generations. When it came to his father's generation, he had no choice but to turn over a new leaf because his territory was taken away. With such a glorious history, how could he be willing to be mediocre? That was why he wanted to recreate the glory of his ancestors. But he failed. Once, twice, thrice. As the saying goes, nothing can happen more than 3 times. After failing 3 times in a row, and it was a crushing defeat without any suspense, anyone would be disheartened. But he still couldn't accept it. The scholar in front of him had indeed opened a new window for him. However, a thought was just a thought. He needed to have the strength to match it. In the fringe, bandits slaughtered and annexed each other's territories. The winner would naturally obtain a bigger territory and accept everything from the loser. As for the loser, he could only choose to submit or die. He didn't want to choose either of these 2 paths. The bald man waved his hand and said, forget it. The fringe isn't that simple. I might lose my life one day. Li shook his head regretfully and said, all right then. Fong, go ask around and see who is willing to stay here. The first batch of people who stay will be treated like a manager. They will be given a house and a wife after 3 years. They can stay or leave as they please. Fong patted his chest and said, don't worry, young master. Along the way, those fellows have been suppressing their evil thoughts. Some of them have mentioned it to me. I'll go and talk to them now. The bald man was stunned and asked, what do you mean? Li waved his hand and said, don't worry. Our people aren't familiar with this place. It's inconvenient for them to stay here. We need to find a guide who is familiar with this place. I think that mountain tremor tiger is a good choice. Go and ask him if he's willing. Do something? The bald man mumbled. After thinking for a while, he immediately understood what Lin Xing meant by, do something. They were going to do something big. These people were all like monsters. The mountain-shaking tiger was powerful enough and could be considered the largest bandit force in this area, but the other party only sent a dozen people to easily annihilate them. If he really had the help of these people, then whatever tiger of the mountain or soaring dragon of the heavens, they would all be **T. If he was a tiger, he had better lie low. If he was a dragon, he had better coil up. When the time came, he would take over their territory, manpower, and influence. Oh my God! The light that had been extinguished in the bald man's eyes finally reignited. He looked at Li Yi with bright eyes and asked seriously, Mountain-shaking tiger is a two-faced man. He's not a good guy. I'm also very familiar with this place. What do you think of me? Let me think about it. Li Yi looked at him, thought for a moment, and said, I don't think Mountain-shaking tiger is that kind of person. I have to talk to you about this. The bald man moved a stone and sat opposite him. He shook his head and said, "This mountain-shaking tiger was not a good guy before he became a bandit. He killed someone and was forced by the government, so he escaped here. He first joined a stockade, then poisoned the stockade chief and sat on the throne himself. Then, after a while, Fong came over and said, 'Young master, there are a total of 27 people who are willing to stay.' This number surprised Li quite a bit. The capital was so prosperous and lively, and they had everything they wanted. There was no lack of leisure and entertainment. Yet there were still so many people willing to stay in such a desolate place. What was wrong with them? What kind of people did Mississippi Lu recruit? When he saw what Mississippi Lu said to those people over there, Li understood that it was not what kind of people Mississippi Lu recruited, but what kind of leader they recognized. According to the bald macho man, the mountain-shaking tiger was really a bastard who had ulcers on the soles of his feet and pus on the top of his head. No one knew when he would stab someone in the back. Therefore, the job of tour guide and consultant naturally fell on the bald man who was fated with him. When he was thinking about some arrangements in his heart, a cold touch suddenly came to the tip of his nose. Li reached out and touched it. His fingertips were slightly wet. Looking up at the sky, Fong walked over quickly and said, "Young master, look at the sky. It's going to rain. Let's go to the mountain-shaking tiger's territory to hide from the rain. We'll leave when the rain stops." Li nodded. Fong walked over, waved his hand and said loudly, "It's raining. Everyone hurry up and keep up." The rain in the mountains really came without warning. As soon as they walked to the mountain-shaking tiger's place, before they had time to sit down, the heavy rain poured down. Li stood at the window and looked at it. It seemed that it would not stop for a while. The rain in the mountains comes and goes quickly. The rain should stop in an hour at most. However, it's raining so heavily that it should be difficult to walk later. The bald man was always trying to show his value. At this moment he stood at the door and showed that he knew the weather in the mountains very well. It turned out that this bald man might not be a good mountain bandit, but he was a good weather forecaster. After more than half an hour the rain really stopped. Although the rain was not light, it did not last long. The road was only slightly muddy. Fong came over and asked, "Young master, are we leaving?" Li waved his hand and said, "Let's stay here for the night and leave tomorrow." The muddy road was only one of the reasons. Since he had decided to do something here, of course he had to arrange the route and plan for the future. After all, he was far away in the capital. Everything here in the future still depended on them. Li looked at Fong and said, "Call Rui over." There were many things to plan. The first thing was how to deal with mountain-shaking tiger and the others. These vicious bandits should either be eliminated for the sake of the people and put an end to their troubles, or they should be crippled of their martial arts and sent to build roads, bridges and houses. As for the other small fries, they could not do the same. Of course, the road still needed to be paved. First, they should be tempered to wear down their character. Then they should be disorganized and reorganized. Those people could be trained to be the new base. Big fish preys on small fish preys on shrimps. The weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of the fringe. Today's boss might not be tomorrow's boss. Tomorrow's boss might be hacked to death in the evening. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, not many people would be willing to become bandits. Although they couldn't be completely trusted, they didn't need to be trusted to build a house or to be a lackey who could fight wherever he wanted. Among the small leaders, he could take a white rabbit creamy candy pill to control them. Every 3 months he would take a hawthorn pill to detoxify the poison. After that he could let them control their subordinates. At the very least, there was no lack of poison experts among those who roamed the Jianghu. It was not impossible to consider using their real skills. However, this kind of method was a little too lowly. If it really came to that, it would be better to let them mine and build roads. There were some more detailed things that he had to discuss with Mississippi Lu. The sky gradually darkened. The candlelight in the room flickered. A map spread on the table gradually became more and more marks. First, nibble away at the small forces. As for the new recruits, we need to train them. We need a base that is easy to defend and hard to attack. This place definitely won't do. Look here. If we go deeper, it won't be as simple as bandits. Let's avoid them for now. From here, here and here. The whispers in the room continued until late at night. Li put down his pen. Mississippi Lu walked to his bed and crawled into his newly made quilt. Sleep early. Li nodded habitually. After a moment of daze, he suddenly realized that he was no longer in Feng province. She was now sleeping on his bedding. Li Yi stood by the table and began to think. Where should he sleep tonight? The map on the table was still spread out. It was filled with marks like O or X. The bulging marks were mountains, the thicker lines were rivers, and the thinner lines were roads. At this time, on a muddy mountain road, a group of more than 100 people was advancing with difficulty. Fush! The young man stepped into the quagmire and his face darkened once more. He looked down at the raging river below and could not help but curse angrily. Damn rain, damn Li Yi. Chapter 729. As a matter of fact, Li Yi didn't sleep at all last night. His decision to intervene in the fringe's affairs wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This idea had been in his mind since a year ago or perhaps even longer. After all, in today's society, there was no such thing as a carefree life. He no longer had one or two people standing behind him. No matter what kind of trouble he might encounter in the future, he had to leave at least 17 or 18 escape routes for himself. He spent the entire night making the arrangements for the fringe's future as detailed as possible. Although he couldn't say that he covered every single detail, he wouldn't overlook the general direction. He also had to make arrangements for the people who would stay behind in the fringe one by one. He had to make the arrangements as detailed as possible to avoid future problems. This wasn't an easy task. It was physically and mentally taxing. When the oil lamp on the table gave its last spark and extinguished its flame, Li Yi raised his head and saw that the sky was almost bright. You didn't sleep at all last night? Li Yi turned around and saw Mississippi Lu getting off the bed and walking towards him with a coat draped over her shoulders. She still has the cheek to ask me such a question. Li Yi covered his mouth and yawned. A wave of fatigue washed over him. You're awake. I'm going to take a nap. He waved his hand, walked over, took off his shoes and coat and crawled into bed. It's been a long time since I've smelled a fragrance from my bed. It's a completely different scent from Rui's. More importantly, this bed is still warm. For some reason the term bed warming maid suddenly popped up in his mind. Then after that he lost consciousness. Mississippi Lu turned around and walked to the table. She was startled when she saw the things on the table. She heard even breathing sounds coming from the bed. She turned around and looked again. She didn't look away for a long time. Young master, are you awake? After an unknown period of time, a voice came from outside the door. She collected her thoughts and put on her clothes. After a simple wash, she opened the door. We haven't seen each other for a few months and the son-in-law has become lazy. It's already so late and he's still not up. Fong stood at the door and muttered softly. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a creaking sound behind him. Goo. Fong turned around and swallowed his words. I'm sorry, second miss, I went the wrong way. He quickly walked to the side and after looking left and right, a puzzled look appeared on his face. That's right. Mississippi Lu walked out of the door, then turned around and said, Don't disturb him. Let him sleep a little longer. Fong looked into the room. When he saw a figure lying on the bed, his eyes immediately widened. At this moment, his heart received an unprecedented impact. He needed to think carefully about what had happened during the few months when the son-in-law and second miss were away. Young miss, son-in-law, second miss. His mind was in a mess, even more so than every time he passed by Willow Lane. The weather in the mountains was indeed unpredictable. It had rained heavily yesterday and the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing down. When Li Yi woke up, he washed up and walked out. The warm breeze was warm and the sun was shining brightly above his head. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The bald bandit said that there was a flash flood in a nearby stream, which was a common occurrence in the mountains. Li Yi did not intend to delay. After 2 hours he informed them of the strategic plans for the next 2 years and planned to set off today. When he left, he naturally left behind a sum of money. Regardless of whether it was to purchase rations or to recruit soldiers, they would need to spend a lot of money. Li Yi had never been stingy when it came to investments with great potential. This time around, if it wasn't for the generosity of the Bing region's officials, he would have been a little short on money. When the bald bandit saw those chests, his eyes widened. After living for so long, this was the first time he had seen so much money. He subconsciously thought that they had robbed this along the way, and he no longer had any doubts about something. Robbing caravans was just a low-level bandit. Robbing bandits was the true bandit of bandits. As expected, they had really gone down the wrong path in the past. What happened next depended on them. For now, this was all the help Li Yi could provide them. He did not know if it was because he did not make Fong stay, but Li Yi felt that the way Fong looked at him today was very strange. His gaze was rich with emotions, which was extremely rare. However, no matter how strange it was, he did not intend to leave this fellow here. After all, no one but Fong himself could withstand the power of his wife. The bald bandit pointed to the rushing flood and said, "Follow this river. If everything goes well, we can reach Shu province in 3 to 5 days." Due to the heavy rain yesterday, the trickling stream had now turned into a muddy torrent. It was quite powerful. Fortunately, mountain torrents often broke out here. The river was so wide that it couldn't reach the shore, and the water couldn't reach the mountain path on one side. "Let's go." After Li Yi cleared his throat and gave the order to set off, the creaking of the carriage came from behind. At a bend in the mountain path ahead, the man surnamed Fong's clothes were still wet and stuck to his body, making him feel especially uncomfortable. His shoes and socks were also wet, and there was even water in his boots. His eyes were bloodshot, and the depression and anger in his heart had almost reached the limit. The nearly 100 figures around him were in the same situation. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had already encountered several groups of bandits. They all treated them as caravans. Although they were all weak bandits, they still brought them a lot of trouble and completely messed up their journey. The sudden rain yesterday had caught them unprepared, and they did not even have time to set up camp. Although they had rested for a night, the mountain was wet and their clothes were still wet. In such a state, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive as they walked on the bumpy mountain path. Damn it, Li Yi, don't let me meet you again." As he cursed angrily, the group of people had already reached a bend in the mountain path. The carriage in front of them suddenly stopped. The youth named Fong looked up and saw that 1,000 feet away, the figure in front of them, as well as the creaking sound of the carriage, was very, very close. "Protector, there seems to be a caravan in front." A hint of impatience appeared on the man surnamed Fong's face. Although he did not know which caravan dared to pass through here, since he had encountered them, there was no reason for him to let them go. He waved his hand and was about to speak when a figure suddenly flew out from the carriage. The middle-aged Daoist nun's face was slightly pale, and her eyes were filled with shock and uncertainty as she looked ahead. There really are caravans passing through this place," Li Yi said in astonishment as he looked at the horse carriage and the silhouette of the people not far away from him. However, the surprise on his face quickly disappeared. Looking at the figures in blue and yellow, he dismounted and muttered, "It can't be." It was unknown when the sloppy old man had appeared beside him. After throwing a piece of candy into his mouth, he fiercely chewed and slowly said, "Yes." Old Daoist Yuan appeared on his other side. Looking at the figure in front, he said, "So it's her?" Chapter 730. Good will be rewarded, evil will be punished. It's not that there will be no retribution, it's just that the time has not yet come. Good and evil will always be rewarded, the heavenly Tao reincarnates. If you don't believe it, look up Who Will the Heavens Spare? Li Yi had always believed in these two sentences, and he unswervingly followed them by example. He helped the elderly cross the road, picked up money and handed it to the authorities. Although he had not done any of these things, he had occasionally gone to Willow Lane to help 2 weak women carry water and cook. Therefore, he had always thought that his encounter with Taoist nun was a result of God's glaucoma. Now God's glaucoma had been cured. In any case, he was a transmigrator, and transmigrators were rare. Who knows, he might be used as a model by some discerning author in the future, and become the protagonist of a novel. With the protagonist's halo on his head, he would walk to the peak of his life, and in the end he would rule the world, embrace beauties and live a shameless life. As a protagonist, how could he be bullied? Li Yi now knew that the process was full of twists and turns, but the result was already set in stone. All the twists and turns were waiting for him. Li Yi looked left and right and said, "Elder Yuan Su, this time I'll leave it to you. Taoist priests and Taoist nuns, none of them are good." Su nodded strangely and said, "Leave that damn Taoist nun to me." The middle-aged Taoist priest glanced at him but did not say anything. Li Yi turned around, pointed to the front and said, "Those people are not simple, everyone be careful." Along the way they were already familiar with this kind of thing and did not even need to explain or say much. The crowd behind them had already started moving. In front, looking at the crowd pressing toward them as well as the two extremely dangerous figures in front of them, Taoist Nun's face finally darkened. "Retreat." As soon as her voice fell, she had already disappeared. That thing. The youth surnamed Fong had already realized something and his expression changed. He looked ahead, then looked at the rushing torrent below and waved his hand to the back, gritted his teeth and jumped down. He was already clear about the strength of those people. This time he had chosen this path to avoid them, but who would have thought? The man with the surname Fong's actions were like throwing a stone into the surging muddy water, instantly disappearing without a trace. Li Yi looked at the yellow-clothed and blue-clothed people jumping into the mountain torrent like dumplings. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time he sighed and murmured, "They are really cruel to themselves." Su and Taoist Yuan went after the Taoist nun. As for the rest of the people, seeing that the situation was not good, they all jumped into the water and disappeared in an instant. Seeing that they did not hesitate at all, Li Yi strongly suspected that the followers of the holy religion had really learned some secret techniques like the water escape technique. As the second most important person in the cult, he had never heard of something that even the ordinary members of the cult knew. The Taoist nun was so cunning. She actually hid it from him. In the end, there were still some people who did not react in time. Before they could use the water escape technique, their acupuncture points were sealed. There were about a dozen people. Naturally, these people could not jump into the water. The water was vast and mighty and it was mixed with sand and stones. Even if the top experts jumped in, their lives would be in the hands of the heavens. If they did not know the water escape technique, they could only rely on the protection of the goddess. However, their goddess probably did not have the time to protect them now because she could not even protect herself. As Li Yi walked over, Fong ran over excitedly and said excitedly, young master, we are rich." He opened a few big boxes in a row. Even Li Yi could not help but be stunned when he saw the contents of the boxes. Gold and silver were the lowest grade here. All kinds of treasures, calligraphy and paintings were piled up in the boxes like sundries. If they were all exchanged for silver, it would probably be an extremely terrifying number. They are actually so rich. This time, Li Yi was really a little shocked. The Taoist nun's base was in the Qi kingdom. This trip back from the Jing kingdom was actually able to gather so many treasures. Just how rich was their cult's foundation? Damn it, it was really too tempting. Li Yi still felt a little pained when he left the starting capital for the bald bandit and the others. But this time he did not dare to say that he would earn back tens of times the amount. Li Yi walked over and stopped in front of a man in yellow. He asked, "Speak, what are you doing here?" The man snorted coldly. "You betrayed the goddess. You will not have a good ending." These followers were stubborn. Li Yi had already experienced it. He did not know what method the Taoist nun had used to brainwash them so successfully. Fong picked him up with one hand and said, "Young master, wait for me for a while." Having said that, he walked towards a corner. After a while he came back and said, "Young master, I've asked him." He said that they were returning to the Qi kingdom this time. In order to avoid bumping into us, they took this path. This was fate. Everything was predestined. Although these treasures could not make up for what the Taoist nun had done to him, they could at least repay what they could. They could barely be considered compensation for the psychological damage. As for the physical body, they could talk about the physical body when there was a chance in the future. Fong hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, there's one more thing." "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. Fong pointed at the boxes and said in a low voice. He said that these treasures were stolen from the king of Shu's treasury. This was the true meaning of fate. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at Fong in confusion and asked, "What did you say just now?" Fong was stunned. He shook his head and said, "Did I say anything just now?" "No. You really didn't." Li was very pleased. After not seeing each other for a long time, Fong had finally become a little more understanding. Fong pointed at the men in yellow and asked, "Young master, what should we do with these people?" In fact, it was useless to keep these people. In the holy religion, the status and strength could be seen from the clothes they wore. The purple emissaries, blue emissaries, yellow emissaries, and then ordinary believers. The strength of these men in yellow was not high. Otherwise they would not have been subdued without any time to react. These people were different from the mountain bandits. They were very stubborn and could not be subdued for their own use. It was better to let them invest in basic construction. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Send them to the bald man. They know what to do." Zhu came back very soon. He did not look very good. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said, "If a guru wants to escape, it is very difficult to stop her. Coincidentally, she is very good at lightness skills, so we did not catch up with her." Li Yi shook his head, indicating that he did not care. Although he still felt a little regretful, he also knew that gurus were not that simple. He was mentally prepared and would not be too disappointed. Thinking of something, he looked at the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Taoist Master Yuan, do you know her?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded and said, "I thought she would disappear without a trace. I did not expect that in just a short 20 years she has grown to such an extent. Taoist Master Yuan, is this Taoist nun related to you?" The slovenly old man glanced at him and asked with a frown, "You are so old and have one foot in the coffin. Could it be?" The middle-aged Taoist glanced at the slovenly old man and ignored him. He said slowly, "When I saw her she was about the same age as Miss Lu. It was during the transition between the old and the new dynasties. Because the Feng family was involved in the factional struggle in the court, they were exterminated. Now that more than 20 years have passed, the hatred in her heart has not disappeared." He looked in a certain direction and sighed, "She is also a pitiful person." Chapter 731. The grudge between the Taoist nun and the old emperor was deep. Li Yi had met them several times along the way. Although he did not know the ins and outs of the whole matter, he knew a little. Now he understood that there was more than just a grudge between them. The hatred of the extermination of the family was as deep as the sea. Although the old emperor had not ascended to the throne at that time, it was not wrong to put the blame on the old Li family. Killing an entire family and they were not allowed to rebel? Now that he thought about it, it had not been easy for the Taoist nun. Traveling to other countries and enduring humiliation for more than 20 years, not only did his martial arts cultivation reach Xianxia realm, he even managed to develop such a huge faction. If this were to be placed in a novel or drama, it would definitely be used as a revenge plot of the protagonist, and there would be no need for any changes at all. His conscience told him that if this had happened to him, he would have taken even more extreme measures. However, understanding was one thing, but he could not forgive what the Taoist nun had done. The one who killed her family was the old emperor's father. Of course, there was no way to take revenge. It was too difficult to take revenge on the old emperor. Logically speaking, the most suitable target for her to kill, torture, and tie up should be the king of Shu. What did it have to do with him? Sympathy was sympathy, but he still had to repay what he owed. Although it was a pity that he did not catch the Taoist nun, he could not force her. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and cover these things. Let's go quickly. We have to find a place to stay before it gets dark." Night gradually fell. Somewhere in the open space in the mountains, simple tents had been set up. Lights shone from the tents. Outside the tents, there was a roaring bonfire. Toasts were exchanged in the surroundings, and the deer legs above the fire were dripping with fat, making a sizzling sound. The roars of all kinds of beasts came from the mountains, but it did not affect this small carnival. Even a certain man sitting by the fire was still hesitating in his heart. How should he eat the bear that he had just hunted back? Dozens of miles away, a torrent of sand rolled away. The middle-aged Taoist nun carried a figure away from the riverbank and slowly walked deeper into the mountains. In the endless darkness, the shadows of the trees swayed like ferocious beasts choosing people to devour. There were also subtle sounds coming from it. "There's actually someone. It's a Daoist nun. A Daoist nun is also passable." Several figures walked out of the darkness and chased after them. Shu Prefecture, King Shu's mansion. The king of Shu had become haggard in recent days. The servants in the residence could not relax, fearing that they would be scolded or punished by the king of Shu. "Your Highness, there's still no news.